Welcome, everybody, to the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. Pursuant to order of reference of Wednesday, May 29th, we're studying Bill C-49, an act to amend the Museums Act in order to establish the Canadian Museum of History. And very pleased, as our first witness, to have the Honourable James Moore, Minister of Canadian Heritage and Official Languages. Welcome, Minister, and as well as representatives from the Department of Heritage that I'll have you introduce if you like. So without further ado, I'll turn the floor over to the Minister for your opening remarks.
Merci, Mr. Président. Merci, mes collègues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, colleagues. I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon to present and discuss Bill C-45 to create the new Canadian Museum. I'm accompanied today by Mr. Daniel Jean, Deputy Minister, Canadian Heritage, and Hubert Lucier, Assistant Deputy Minister for Citizenship and Heritage. I'll keep my remarks as short as possible, of course, to allow for maximum time for discussion.
It's not a tough read, of course. It spells out the mandate for the Canadian Museum of History. And the mandate is very simple and it's indeed very clear. It says, quote, "The purpose of the Canadian Museum of History is to enhance Canadians' knowledge, understanding, and appreciation of events, experiences, people, and objects that reflect and have shaped Canada's history and identity, and also to enhance their awareness of world history and cultures." That's what the bill says. There's nothing ideological about this. It's actually quite straightforward. En 2017, nous célébrons le 150e anniversaire du Canada.
In 2017, we'll be celebrating Canada's 150th birthday. This will be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to celebrate all that Canada has accomplished, to look back on 150 years of history, to be thankful for our past, and to think ahead to the next 150 years.
Sadly, an entire generation of Canadians who are largely illiterate about Canada's history. It's a truth. And with the Canadian Museum of History, we are going to start building the national infrastructure that I think this country needs, and so desperately needs, so that we can tell our stories one to another, so Canadians can better understand our local histories and our shared histories. And I feel that we've had a constructive debate on this legislation in the House. Some members of Parliament have raised some concerns about what this museum could lead to, and I just want to respond to a couple of the specific concerns that I know were raised in the House by Mr. Sims and Mr. Nantel. First, let me quote the Museums Act, particularly on the issue that has been raised about that the museum could be interfered with by the government, the minister, or frankly any member of Parliament. The Museums Act is very clear. It spells out straightforward the independence of all of our museums, including this museum. Section 27 spells out the independence of our museums when it states, quote, "No directive shall be given to a museum with respect to cultural activities, including its activities and programs for the public, including exhibitions, displays, publications, and research." So Section 27 of the Museums Act is very clear, it's straightforward, and it dispels any false accusations that this bill or the creation of this museum is in any way a politicization of Canada's history, because it's the law. Enfin, je suis heureux de voir le soutien non partisan et généralisé.
Very pleased to see the support, very non-partisan support the project has received from historians and historical associations across the country.
In the Canadian Museum of History, the broad-based support that this proposal has received. Of course, no proposal is ever unanimous. As I said to Mr. Sims in the House, I think, I remember back in the debate when the Liberals made the decision at the time of a recession to create the Canadian War Museum. And that was a very controversial decision. And it turns out today that the Canadian War Museum is indeed one of the best museums in this country and only has a peer in the world with Les Invalides in Paris and the Imperial War Museum in London. It's a fantastic museum that I think all Canadians, regardless of ideology, believe in. So that museum was launched with a great deal of difficulty, and I think if you look at the proposal that we have here to create the Canadian Museum of History and the broad-based support that this museum has received, I think it's important to point that out. This museum has been supported, for example, by Douglas Cardinal, who was the original architect of the Canadian Museum of Civilization. It's supported by the Mayor of Ottawa, Jim Watson. It's supported by the Mayor of Gatineau, Mr. Bureau. This project also has the support of celebrated historians from across the country, including award-winning historian and author Michael Bliss, who had this to say about this bill. He said, quote, "It's very exciting that Canada's major museum will now be explicitly focused on Canada's history, thanks to this government for making this museum possible. Jack Granatstein, of course, the former chair of the Museum of Civilization, he supports this legislation and supports the creation of this museum. He said, quote, "This move to create a new Canadian Museum of History is exactly what should happen. It's exactly what should happen. And I'm delighted that the government is doing it." John McCavity, who is going to be with you later on this afternoon, he also supports this because he recognizes the value of this large national institution, the largest museum in all of Canada, and creating a pan-Canadian network of all of Canada's museums that have an aspect of teaching and disseminating information about Canada's history, to network them all together so they can share resources and share collections and move items around the country. This will be a benefit not just for this great institution here in the National Capital, but every museum across the country has the potential to benefit from this by becoming official partners so they can get access to the 3.5 million items that are in the collection of this museum, over 90% of which are in storage and no Canadian has access to. Historica Dominion Institute. The Historica Dominion Institute is also supporting this because they understand, by the way, one of the great organizations across this country that works out and reaches with children across this country. They recognize the value of this as well. The Ontario Museums Association has come out and supported this. Also, by the way, important historians who are not conservative and probably would chastise me for suggesting, or if anybody suggesting that they might in any way be conservative. For example, as I noted in the House, John English, who's a former Liberal member of Parliament, who's also a biographer of Pierre Trudeau's, he's come out and supported this legislation, congratulating the government for supporting this, as has Richard Gwynn, who's a biographer of both John A. Macdonald and Pierre Trudeau himself, who is supporting this initiative. And Deborah Morrison, who is the head of Canada's National History Society, said, quote, "The potential for the new museum to help create a national framework for our history is compelling, and the time is right." And I agree with her. And I have to say as well, I was very pleased in the House of Commons when we had the second reading vote in the House of Commons that independent member of Parliament, one of our colleagues from Thunder Bay, he supported this legislation, and so did Elizabeth May, of course, leader of the Green Party, supports this legislation. As do, by the way, New Democrats in the provincial scene in British Columbia who have supported this legislation. And I'm also pleased to say that this past weekend I spoke at the FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, in their national meeting in Vancouver as part of my speech at lunch to over 1,000 delegates. The project was entirely well received. There were no complaints, and when I met with the executive of the FCM in a closed-door meeting before my speech, there was unanimous support for this from mayors across the country. Mayor Nenshi of Calgary, Gregor Robertson from Victoria, former NDP MLA in British Columbia, who sees the big value of this project and what it would mean for the city of Vancouver and indeed for all this country. So this is a proposal that we've put forward as we go towards Canada's 150th birthday in 2017. It has broad-based support from Canadians of all kinds of ideologies and all kinds of backgrounds, and by the way, non-ideologies, just people who are passionate about the teaching and learning of Canada's history, who think that this country, that we deserve to have our own Smithsonian. We deserve to have a large national museum about which we can be incredibly proud. We do have that in the Museum of Civilization, but we can do so much better with a new Canadian Museum of History by tying all of our institutions across this country together as we head towards our 150th birthday and celebrate the incredible stories of Canada's history gone by. So I think many of you know, have been in the House when you've heard me speak in the House in the details of the reforms that we're putting forward. $25 million to do the changes of half the floor space in the existing museum. The Children's Museum, which is in the museum itself, will stay as it is. The Canada Hall will be reformed in the back. The First Peoples exhibit, which is award-winning and spectacular, that will stay as it is. But we're reforming the floor space as well because it hasn't been updated in over 20 years. As a matter of fact, in the Canada Hall, there's virtually no representation of Aboriginal Canadians whatsoever in there, and that needs to be updated and improved. We can do better. We should do better. We're heading towards our 150th birthday. We have great stories as a country to tell, and I think we ought to do a service to that. And I just would close by saying to my colleagues, you know, I understand that there are some concerns about this, and maybe this will be a circumstance of hear me now, believe me later. But I'm here to tell you that this is a project that has broad-based support across the country. It's self-evident by the votes we've had in Parliament and those who have publicly come out to endorse this project, because it's time for this country to think big and to do something bigger than just the obvious stuff, and to have great national institutions that bind us together. As I said to Scott, you know, those are the great moments. You know, and I'll say this, you know, the best in the sort of the sweep of Canada's history. The best of the NDP, I'll say this, the best of the NDP is when they've supported national projects that they thought were of national in scope, national in consequence, for example, in the support of Medicare. That was a national idea, an idea that was good for the entire country, that they advocated, and they went beyond partisanship and reached out to get support. And of course, it was a Liberal federal government that did that, but it was a national idea that they worked with others to get done because they believed in it. Equally true with the Liberal Party, some national projects and national efforts that they've had. Conservative governments in the past, we've had ours as well. And I think this, along with other institutions that we have in this country, is part of the fabric of what we're trying to do, is to strengthen that fabric that binds this country together. Because when you think about it, right, Canada is the second largest country in the world in size. But in terms of population, we're the 34th largest country in the world. So what unites us as a country? Language, the arts, culture, shared sense of history, an understanding of one another, an understanding of our grievances, our past, the difficulties of the past, how we got over them, how we still struggle, our shared sense of identity. And in a massive country like this that has historically been divided, English and French and East and West and North and South and Aboriginal and non and labor and business and Protestant and Catholic in the early days, all these divisions, we've been able to overcome them through the sweep of Canada's history, because we have a better understanding over time about what it is that we can accomplish. And I would just urge my colleagues, we're moving forward as a government with this. We're very proud of this project. And I deeply and sincerely thank all those who have come on board across this country from all kinds of different political and ideological backgrounds to support this effort. And I would urge my colleagues in this committee, and indeed all members of this House, to look at it that way. That's how I presented this. My colleagues know I presented this legislation. I talked to my colleague, the heritage critic from the NDP, before we tabled this legislation. I told you about this idea. I showed you the legislation. I showed you what we had in mind. I showed it as well to the Liberal critic. I showed it to Elizabeth May as the leader of the Green Party in the House. It's one of the reasons why she's supporting this bill, because I want to work with other members of Parliament to get this project right. So I'll turn it back to you, Chair, and to you colleagues for questions about this project. But I would urge you to give this serious thought and to support this institution, support this effort to build this network, this pan-Canadian network of great history institutions that will keep this country united and better educated and better understanding about our past so we can stay united going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Moore. Now we'll move to our rounds of questions and answers. And first up is Mr. Young for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, in debate in the House, the opposition has falsely claimed that our government is interfering with the independence of the museum. So before I go to specific questions, I'd like to give you the opportunity to address this incorrect assertion.
It is flatly false. I can tell you there's no head of any museum in this country, certainly our national museums, that will tell you that I've ever interfered with anything that any of our national museums have ever displayed. From time to time, whenever there's a controversial item that's on display in a museum or seemed to be controversial by some in this country, I'm often asked, what do you think of this display? What do you think of that exhibit? What do you think of this item? And from time to time, I choose to offer my opinion. But at no time, ever, can I, or would I, but nor can I, as a minister, ever tell a museum what they can or cannot display, nor the narrative that they can tell about Canada's history, nor the narrative that they can tell about Canadian science, nor the narrative that they can tell in the National Gallery. These are independent institutions protected by law, by the way. And you don't have to take my view on this as, trust me, I'm James Moore, the Heritage Minister, I won't get involved. It's the law. The law prevents me, or any minister, or any member of Parliament, or any government from interfering with any of our institutions in the way in which they decide to display their items and their collections. So it's just the law. So as a critique, I have to say it's a pretty weak one, because the evidence is pretty obvious about the fact of how our institutions are established in this country.
Thank you. Minister, in past budgets, our budgets, the opposition has voted against important increases to the arts and culture industry. Can you provide the committee with some insight as to why the opposition refuses to support our national museums or the arts and cultural industry as a whole?
Well, let me focus at the substance of the question this way. In Budget 2012, as colleagues know, that was where we put in place the what we call DRAP, the Deficit Reduction Action Plan of our government, which are the reductions in government spending so that we can arrive at a balanced budget in 2015. And within the Department of Canadian Heritage, which in terms of scope, by the way, the Department of Heritage is the third largest department in the Government of Canada, not in budget, but in scope. And there are a number of decisions that we had to make, some difficult decisions, some of them are more self-evident, in order to make budget cuts, in order to make our contribution to arriving at a balanced budget. We decided to protect all of our funding for the Canada Council for the Arts because I think, as all members of this committee know, is when you talk to artists across the country, that's one of the most revered and important crown corporations that exists when it comes to supporting culture. We did make a decision, for example, to cut funding for CBC. We also made a decision not to cut funding for any one of our national museums. The reason why we did that was there are multiple reasons for that. One is that we're still in the process of building the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg, and they've had some struggles, but financially they're on track. It's a $351 million build, a $21 million per year operating budget thereafter. But that museum is still being established. So the idea of cutting their budget before they're being built while their build is dependent on some of that funds is something that seemed to me to be a crazy idea. Equally, we're creating, of course, the Museum of Immigration at Pier 21 in Halifax. So that museum is just getting off the ground and moving forward, and they're looking to expand. So no reductions there either. And also the Canadian Museum of Civilization, which we had the idea to turn into the Canadian Museum of History. We didn't want to cut that budget as well because we wanted to make sure this project is launched and moving forward. So, the opposition parties, I'm sure, have a number of reasons why they may or may not support the government's budget and our budget items. But specifically on the issue of museums, we went out of our way to protect our museums, and by the way, as a consequence, maybe have had to make spending reductions in other areas that were more consequential to those institutions. But I think we have some of the best museums in this country, some of the largest museums in the country, and when the Canadian Museum for Human Rights is just being born, we want to make sure that it has a great launch and is a great institution, not just for Winnipeg, Manitoba, but for all of Canada. We want to make sure the Museum of Pier 21, the Museum of Immigration at Pier 21, isn't just about the story of Pier 21, but that it has a national perspective, not just a Halifax perspective. And equally, we want to make sure that the History Museum is launched with sound funding so it can be a success for all Canadians.
As you know, Minister, since 2006, we have invested an additional $142 million in our national museums. Could you please summarize why the opposition should support our efforts to promote and maintain our national museums, including the new Canadian Museum of History?
I think the answers are self-evident, and because we have great museums and they deserve our support. But another item that was in the budget, I didn't spell this out, it wasn't in my speech, but I think this is really important because the question has been raised. Scott, I think, most persistently asks this question, and it's an important one. We have as a Government of Canada the Indemnification Fund, right? And the Indemnification Fund is what it sounds like. The Government of Canada indemnifies collections and items that can move within the country and come in from abroad to our national museums and galleries. And the annual amount that the Government of Canada can indemnify in a calendar year is $1.5 billion. The problem has been in years past is that the $1.5 billion in exposure that the Government of Canada can make itself available to per calendar year is very often consumed by March and April, and it's usually the largest institutions in the country that take up that capacity, the ROM in Toronto, Glenbow, other institutions like that. In Budget 2012, the same one where we had the reductions, but we protected all of our museums, we doubled the indemnification fund from $1.5 to $3 billion per year. So there's $3 billion per year now of exposure by the Government of Canada for collections. And that's what's a doubling. And therefore, all these museums across the country that will have the capacity to become official partners of the Canadian Museum of History will now be able to have the collections that are housed in the National Museum that they want to host locally can be eligible for protection and indemnification through the indemnification fund that we've expanded, that we've doubled. And as a consequence, all these museums will now have access to collections that they never otherwise had before. First, because of the creation of the museum and then signing those partnerships, and second, because we've doubled the indemnification funds, they have access to those collections. So these are two key measures that will benefit museums all across the country, which is why, for example, the Canadian Museums Association is supporting this legislation and supporting these efforts, because it'll benefit everybody. It's not just about an institution here in the national capital. It's about the entire country, and these reforms, working hand in hand, will benefit all of our museums.
Thank you, Mr. Young.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Nantel for 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Mr. Moore, for having your officials with you. Given the numerous debates that we've had in the House, on several occasions in the House, we've seen some were getting very enthusiastic about the idea that we'd be able to share more artifacts, more museum materials throughout the country. And for anyone who might hear what you're talking about with this project, it's a good idea. But there seems to be some confusion in this matter. All of the items that were mentioned so far are already covered in the current mandate of the museum. And we've emphasized this quite a bit. But the current exhibits that we find at the Canadian Museum of Civilization could also be subject to the same type of sharing or distribution or circulation. What is it that concerns you in the current museum? Well, first of all, I find that it's an extraordinary museum, and all those who are working there, who are building its exhibits, curating them, etc., are doing a wonderful job. But if we take a look at the Grand Hall, Canadian Hall, there's been no change to it in over 20 years. That's a bit of an issue. We're looking at 150th anniversary of Canada, and we have to update it to bring it up to date. We're in the 21st century. If we take a look at the Postal Museum, which is within the Museum of Civilizations, as you know, it's not frequented very well. There's very few visitors there. I think we could probably integrate it more efficiently in a bigger exhibit, perhaps, and draw more visitors. They've had a number of successes, of course, with the number of persons that visit the museum, but we can expand its programming. We could increase and enhance its attractiveness, and we could develop other partnerships throughout the country and Canada here that would give net benefits to all. And I think it's a good move. Well, you said earlier in your opening remarks, and you must be aware that there are very, very proficient museum experts in the room here today. Dr. George McDonald's with us here. He reacted to your proposals when you said First Nations were not covered. And I'll quote, "I was shocked to hear Mr. Moore said that the Aboriginal peoples are excluded from the display in the Grand Hall." It was clear that he did not understand this importance to the fishing communities of the West Coast. The pressure to remove the exhibit flies directly in the face of what he claims the new legislation will achieve. What's your response to that?
Exhibit, so I don't know what that's referring to. But it's true, as you go through the Canada Hall, as you get to the end of it, you realize that, frankly, apart from the fashions and the architecture, that it very much ends in 1980. It doesn't continue through the 90s and into the modern era. Look, this is a request I know that existed before the current management at the Museum of Civilization for funding to upgrade the museum. And I know that the NDP has said, look, you're not opposed to us investing this money into the museum, you just don't like to change the mandate. So you yourself have acknowledged that this museum could use some updating, and the Canada Hall is proof of point of that. And it's not just that one particular angle, but there's also another one. Is over time, as things have been pointed out, inadequacies in the Canada Hall, for example, it was pointed out to me when I did a tour there not long ago. Acadian Canadians have a plaque on a wall, and that's it. Just a plaque. The story of Acadians and the trauma that they went through and part of Canada's history is not treated, frankly, with real seriousness or any kind of due care in the museum itself. So there are all kinds of examples, and I can tell you, as I've spoken to members of the board of the museum, that when they get the suggestion boxes, that very often people put stuff in there and they say, well, it's not, this story isn't quite adequately told. So having a refresh of the Canada Hall is something that is habitual, by the way, in every other museum in the country. They do this stuff all the time to make sure that they're up to date and they understand the nuances of teaching and disseminating information about history.
Justement, vous avez parlé de consultation et de...
Precisely on the issue of consultation, then I might recall that we had here at our committee, the Heritage Committee, discussed at length celebrating and marking the 150th anniversary of Canada. And as of already in May 2011, you'd already had a fairly clear plan on what was going to be done. In 2013, various associations of anthropologists, historians, museums were consulted. So Have you done consultation for over 2 years? And if so, with whom have you been consulting? We have here consultations that were undertaken by the museum in a basement in Montreal, asking people what they expected of their museum. And you could put little stickers saying, I'd like to see Maurice Richard's jersey. What kind of consultations did you undertake over these 2 years? Well, those consultations were conducted by their museum, and I'm not, I'm not to be implicated in that type of consultation. Mr. Mark O'Neill is going to be here later, and you can ask him those questions. Each of our museums or art galleries is constantly consulting to see what the desires and the wishes of its subscribers and the Canadian public at large are. I've consulted broadly with my colleagues and others, and I responded on the issues of the 150th. What do you want to see on the marking of that celebration? And a great majority of what you said, my mandate, it doesn't issue from this committee. My mandate issues from Canadians at large. And I'm trying to work with the committee as best I can on a number of issues. And this is why I put before all parties in the House of Commons, before we tabled this bill in the House, I talked to you individually on these issues, and you never said, don't do it. Or give us the bill and we'll take a look at it, and etc. So I am here today, and I'm glad to see that you want to discuss it with me.
7 minutes, we have Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, just quickly off the top, who brands a museum? Is that you, or is it a curator of total independence?
Brands, well, the naming of the museum is in the, sorry, this is loud. The naming of the museum is found in the Museums Act. The branding of specific exhibits is up to the museum.
But in this particular case, I mean, certainly there's a great deal of skepticism, even in some of the language that's out here. It's a lot smaller than it used to be. In the new language, you have a knowledge and understanding, as opposed to what was there before, which is knowledge and critical understanding. Some people may look at that as just a small item, but these are words that carry a lot of weight. It's a critical understanding, which in and of itself carries a certain degree of independence. Now, I would like to see a 3-year review about our museums, about the independence, and whether these independence are maintained. And I'm sorry if I sound alarmist, but number one, the committee in a report recommended, all of us recommended, that for the celebrations of 2017, that we would set up an arm's length organization to do this. Already we are now into this exercise, which is also branded as a celebration of 2017, to rename the museum and to produce the artifacts across the country or share with them, which I'm fine with. But the branding that you're doing is, your department has done it before to an excessive degree. We did an order paper question just a short time ago, and here's what was, you rebranded always the Government of Canada, the Government of Canada. Now, most of the releases contain the words Harper Government as a rebranding exercise. Now, from June 28th, 2011 to March 2013, all departments put out 2,600 releases containing the term Harper Government. The #1 department was yours, by far. By 600 releases, that's a quarter of the total. So that's your branding exercise. I hope this is not what we're seeing here, to actually infringe upon the curatorial independence of this organization.
Quite a stretch, Scott. Look, you're comparing apples.
Fine, but
you're comparing apples
illustrate
and bricks.
my stretch.
Look, because you're talking about the Department of Canadian Heritage versus a museum. I don't run the museum, and I don't send out any press releases from the museum. The museum sends out all of its own press releases. You understand the difference, right? The museum is not a part of the Department of Canadian Heritage. The museum is its own independent entity created by the Museums Act and protected by the Museums Act from me or you or anybody telling them what they can or can't say. Tell me you understand the difference between the museum sending out a press release and me sending out a press release.
But you have the appointees on the board itself. You now decide the board. You've laid out here in the terms that you have about how you want to see this museum. You're changing the name, yes, but in effect you're also changing a function of this, which really can be dictated by you if you look at the language of this.
The only change is the mandate that is spelled out in Bill C-49. And if you want to change one of the words in there because it'll provide you greater comfort, then I'm prepared to see that. But you haven't told me, you've talked, but you've never said about a specific amendment. But if you want to put pen to paper, be glad to look at it, Scott. Look, as I said to you, we want to work together.
I'll have to wait till we get to that.
That's fine, that's great, and we'll take a look at that. But if that'll provide you greater comfort, that's fine. On the first thing that you said here about a 3-year review of the independence, it's the law. The law is pretty clear. Do you not think the Museums Act is clear about the independence of our
So
museums?
what's to be afraid of? I mean, but
I'm
you
not
did it
afraid
for
of
a
anything. We can
Copyright
review it,
Act.
and then
If
you'll look
you
at it
did
and
it for
you'll
the
say, nothing's
Copyright
changed.
Act,
Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. I mean, it's
that's
the law.
fine. But why did you do it for C11, the Copyright Act? You have a review built
Yeah,
into
we have a 5-year review of the Copyright
That's
Act
right.
for very different reasons, because technological changes over years and international obligations by the Government of Canada shouldn't stop us from reforming our copyright legislation. So technology and international obligations, there's nothing technologically that changes about the Government of Canada having a wall of independence between
Well, of course
it and the
there are. We
museum.
share the artifacts across the country. You said yourself earlier that because of technological changes, some of the changes have to be made no matter what it is. Certainly in this particular case, and when it comes to the museum.
Sorry, I'm not following you at all.
Well, okay.
I'm not following on the technology.
If you have the fundamental reason for you have a review is to make sure that your legislation is working.
Correct.
So why not do a 3-year review of this?
On this particular
Sure.
museum or on all museums?
Sure.
On the independent, you said that's not what you said.
If Canadians have a fundamental concern about the independence of this museum, and perhaps even other museums, wouldn't a 3-year review alleviate that problem?
What you want, but this is a new policy. But look, let's be very, very clear. I mean, this is the first time the Liberals have ever, any member of this Parliament has ever raised this issue. But let's look specifically at the law, Section 27, Section 27 of the Museums Act. Quote, no directive shall be given to a museum with respect to cultural activities, including its activities and programs for the public, including exhibitions, displays, publications, and research. Pretty clear.
So why would you be against a review?
Because it doesn't change, Scott. It's the law. It doesn't, like, words don't jump off the page and jump over each other. It's the law.
But if in other cases you have put a review board in, such as C11.
Propose it.
I don't see. Fine, okay. But it sounds to me like you don't want to do this.
I don't care. If you want to do it, do it. But it's the law. It doesn't change. We don't have...
I'm sure you care, but...
It's the law. It doesn't change.
Okay, let's go back to the first point then. Let's go back to the one I mentioned, the 150th celebration.
Okay.
Do you think that there should be an independent agency to look after the celebrations of 150 years, the sesquicentennial?
Yeah, it's one of the things that we're considering. We haven't decided on it because, to be honest, we had differing experiences. For example, when I was minister responsible for the Vancouver 2010 Olympics, we had VANOC, which is an independent organization. And very often when you have independent organizations, what they will often do, and your government will remember this well, so you have an independent organization that has all kinds of hype, dreams up all kinds of great big things, and stirs up all kinds of excitement about something, and then all they do is turn to the government and say, now fund it. So I think that's not necessarily the best model to follow. So the idea of having certainly independence and making sure that our celebrations are seen to be pan-Canadian, obviously nonpartisan and thoughtful and inclusive of all parts of the country and respectful of our official languages and all of our diversity in the country, of course, that's self-evident. I think that would only benefit the program. But the way in which it's structured matters very much because, as I've personally had the experience in the past, that there have been organizations that have been independent, have dialed up expectations, and then turned to the government and say, now pay for it, without any input whatsoever. I think there's a way to do it that matters, and that was one of the recommendations from the committee that we're looking at, and we're taking it into account.
Thank you,
There's a good argument for it.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. Hillier for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister, for coming and visiting us on this subject. I want to. There's a lot of talk about how this name change and mandate change has been politically motivated. I have trouble seeing it. I don't understand how it's politically motivated. So I guess I wonder if changing this to the Canadian Museum of History, which also includes not just Canadian history, but our place in the world and therefore world history as well, if such a change is politically motivated, would that suggest perhaps that the lack of a Canadian Museum of History up to this point was also politically motivated? Perhaps, you know, the doctrine over, you know, that Canadians have to be self-effacing, and that the only thing that it's somehow Canadian to be pro-Canadian, somehow un-Canadian to be pro-Canadian. I don't know. I guess I can't ask you why people think it's politically motivated, because you can't think for other people. But what are your thoughts on that notion?
Well, like if this was, if this was in any way partisan or politically motivated, I wouldn't have shared the language of the legislation with the NDP and the Liberals and the Green Party before we tabled it. If this was partisan, you know, we wouldn't have the broad-based support that we have. If this was partisan, you know, former NDP MP and independent MP now Bruce Heyer wouldn't have voted for it. If this was partisan, Elizabeth May wouldn't have voted for it. If this was partisan, we wouldn't have the support of former Liberal MP John English. When I spoke to Jean Chrétien about this, he liked the idea and he thought it was a good idea and proposal to go forward with. You know, when I say that this is nonpartisan, I genuinely mean that. And if colleagues want to see devils where there aren't any, then they'll see them, and that's just the way it is. And as I said, maybe this will be a circumstance of believe me later when the results are fully shown. But this is going to be a great project. It's going to be great. It is. It's going to be great. The institutions that are signing up that are lining up to be signatories of MOUs across the country, I can tell you, the Royal BC Museum, the Manitoba Museum, the rooms in St. John's, Newfoundland, they want to sign on. They're going to be partners in this. We have museums all across the country, large and small, who are thumbs up, enthusiastic. They understand the value of this, the importance of this. Every single member of the current board of the Museum of Civilization, every single one of them supports this museum. Past board chairs are supporting this. I mean, this has broad-based support across the country because this is a classic example of Occam's razor. This is exactly what it appears to be: the creation of a national institution that will be of value to every part of the country, to teach Canada's history as Canadians want to teach it one to another in the institutions where they live. That's what this is. And anybody who tries to spin this or torque this into something that it's not is really playing a fool's game.
So you wouldn't say that there was political motivation to avoid it up to this point?
No, look, the Canadian Museum of Civilization, I think, has a great track record. They've had great successes, and I thank the previous. Certainly the staff at the museum is great. I mean, keep in mind, by the way, the Museum of Civilization, about a third of their budget right now goes to research. That'll continue to be the case because there's great research that is done there, and that'll continue to move forward. So, you know, they've built a great legacy there that we're building upon. And if we were in any way disrespecting the Canadian Museum of Civilization, Douglas Cardinal would not be supporting this. He was one of the great visionaries that helped build this institution. If we were in any way diminishing the value of this institution, the mayors of Gatineau and Ottawa wouldn't be supporting this project, but they are, because they see this as an important step forward in enlarging the value of this museum and what it means for the national capital in the country. So, you know, I don't know what to say to the opponents of this. I mean, there are not many of them, and those who are, frankly, their arguments are very, very weak. I have to be blunt.
Chez moi, tous les villes sont jeunes.
In my region, all the cities are very young. Most of the communities and cities have been created late in the 19th, 20th century. I believe that our history formally begins in 1867. And I had never heard the name of Saint-Jean-de-Brébeuf before I took university courses in French. I was studying French literature. Could you give us some comments on the importance of understanding our pre-Confederation history? Well, yes, that is something that's very important to emphasize. I've had opportunities in the House, but not an adequate opportunity to explain myself fully, if you will.
You know, again, I mentioned how we reached out to opposition parties, showed them the language of the bill before we tabled it. We spoke to people before we did this. As a demonstration, by the way, of the effort that we've taken to try to be as inclusive as possible in this museum, some people have said the Canadian Museum of History. Why isn't the Museum of Canadian History? Why isn't the Canadian Museum of History? And the reason why is because we don't want to limit it to singularly and only Canada's history. And equally, it's the Canadian Museum of History because not all Canadians trace back their lineage as beginning in 1867. Of course, Aboriginal Canadians have a different view of when their history and their lineage began on this continent, what it means to them. So we went through painstaking, I think my deputy minister will agree, we had very painstaking conversations and emails back and forth, and Museum of Canadian, and working things around, making it work in both official languages in a way that was inclusive for Canadians themselves and institutions across the country to talk about history and Canadian history in the context that makes the most sense to them. So we came up with the title, the most appropriate one, the one that works best, the Canadian Museum of History, to be inclusive of Canada's First People and to be inclusive of all the different stories and narratives that have led us to where we are today.
One of the things that excites me about this notion is the pan-Canadian network that you talked about. You know, you said in your comments at the beginning that it's time for this country to think big. Now, to be fair, and I'm sure you don't insinuate this, that this is not the first time that this country has ever thought big. We have a nature of thinking big, but I think there's the notion in the past that we could only think big or do big if it's been propped up by the federal government. And you've talked about how the small or the regional museums can profit from this central museum, but what about the other way around? How can the central museum or the one region benefit from another region by them being able to share their local histories with the rest of Canada?
It's an important point as well, and this is one thing that we envision as well, is that not just will local museums be able to draw down items from the National Museum and host them locally, but also so that local museums can take some of their collections and move them to other parts of the country or to the National Museum as well. So the idea of a partnership isn't just stuff moving from the National Museum locally, but stuff locally moving up nationally or moving to other parts of the country. I've had the privilege, it's been an incredible privilege, I can tell you, to visit all kinds of museums across this country, thousands of museums across this country, I can tell you. Going through them with painstaking detail, with lots of boredom on the face of my wife sometimes as I go through some of these things, and aggravating some of the people who are with me by how much time I like to spend in museums. But the truth is, when you go to museums around the country, you realize that there are some incredible gems out there, some incredible things and stories that should be told. I think I told this committee this story when one of the catalysts that drew me to this idea of networking all of our museums together. I've told the story when I visited the Museum of Midway, British Columbia. If you haven't been to Midway, it's a very small town. It is where it sounds like. It's midway across the border between Alberta and the Pacific Ocean on the southern border of British Columbia. Small little town, I think 2,500 person population. They've got a small little museum there. And I went in, and against the back wall, they had this display of the Japanese Canadian Association of Midway, British Columbia. It's a small association. And this was a display of people of Japanese descent who still live in the South Okanagan, who decided, after having been displaced and put in internment camps in the Second World War, they decided to stay in the South Okanagan and make lives for themselves. And there's all kinds of items there that talk about the hardship that they faced, the racism that they went through, the difficulties in establishing themselves, and the pride that they now feel in having gone through all that, and the successful lives that they made for themselves and their families. And it's not a big display, but it's very impactful. And I looked at this and I thought, this is really quite something. Then I left the museum and I signed the guest book, and I was saddened to see that I was about the 60th person to visit that museum in the last 2 months. And I just thought, what a waste. This is a great story to tell. Then as I went on the rest of my road trip, I thought there's got to be some way that, I know the Canadian Museums Association advocates for local museums, but they don't really have the capacity to kind of do these things. What can we do so that people in other parts of the country can see this display and understand its impact, and maybe they can host something in an exchange, and maybe a national museum should see this display, because Japanese internment is spoken about in the Canadian War Museum, but talked about in that kind of a personal way with individual stories of people who talk about what they went through and how they came out the other end and ended up being, very successful and proud Canadians in spite of the suffering that they went through. It's a great story. And so I started thinking about it, and where we arrived at is where we are today, and I'm very proud of that. Like from those moments, those early moments of thinking about how we can tie these institutions together, and here we are. We're now going to, hopefully soon, report stage Bill C-49 to create the Canadian Museum of History, and that little museum in Midway, British Columbia can be a partner now, and that little collection that I saw those couple years ago can now be hosted at the National Museum, and those Japanese Canadians who are telling their story in the South Okanagan might now have the opportunity to share that story with other Canadians.
Thank you.
That's what we're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Hillier. Mr. Cash.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister, for being here. I'm going to have to be fairly quick here. So first of all, the mayor of Gatineau, has he made a public statement of support for this museum?
I believe it was a public statement. He said it to me in private, and
Right. Has he signed a declaration? Has he made a public statement that he is in support of this?
I asked him personally, and he said, yes, absolutely, and if you want me to send something, I don't know if he said something.
And this is part of the problem we have, because so much of the issue here with this museum is that there's it's a personal endeavor between you and other personal relationships that you have. I mean, you're announcing here that the mayor of Gatineau supports the changes when the people of Gatineau haven't heard that officially from the mayor himself. So is this is this the official announcement of his support?
I've said so from the. I spoke to him in my office. I talked to him before we tabled the legislation, as well, Mr. Bureau, and as well with Jim Watson. I told him what
you say that that the government doesn't interfere and that there's that agencies are very independent, but we know that C-60 will give powers to cabinet.
With respect to Andrew, like, just roll through this.
Can I just ask the question first?
Yeah, but just call Mr. Bureau a liar. Like, come on.
Pardon me?
Let's not call people liars. I mean, Mr. Bureau told me directly in my office.
I didn't call. I said, was there a public statement? I asked if there was a public statement of support from the mayor. I didn't call you anything, Minister, with the greatest respect. I asked a simple question, was there a public statement? That's all.
Ask his office.
We already know that C-60 will give powers to cabinet to set terms of employment for all staff at the museum.
Mr. Cash, we're on Bill C-49.
Yeah. I know. I'm going to get it.
You've got the last question, and you've got a few minutes, so bring it on.
Because this is related to independence. We know that the independence, many experts are saying that the independence of Crown corporations will be compromised by this. So when you said we had the idea to make changes to the museum, who is we, first of all?
Well, I did. I talked to a bunch of colleagues. I talked to the president of the museum at the time. I talked to members of the board. I talked to historians. I talked to one of my old history professors back at university. I said, what do you think of this idea? I talk to people in museums across the country all the time, and I say, what do you think of this idea?
How often do you speak to Mr. O'Neill?
I don't know. Where is Mark? I talked to him just before this meeting.
How often? You and him frequently converse?
Well, through the course of this legislation, not any more often than I've spoken with presidents of other museums.
And how about emails and visits and meetings?
I don't have his email address. Where is Mark? I don't have your email.
So what sort of things do you speak about with him?
His favorite color. What he likes in his hot dog.
So, and are there notes?
Important things like that.
And are there notes and records?
We talk about public.
Are there notes? Well, but this is just it. Are there notes and records of these meetings?
This is. Don't.
She's not a prosecutor.
We're come on.
We've got the minister for a short period of time. We're talking about C-49, not Mr. O'Neill's email address and what movies they like. So if we could bring him back to reality, back on Earth, maybe offline you could ask Mr. O'Neill and Mr. Moore what movies they like and what they like on their hot dogs. I don't know, but if we could talk about 49, that would be real.
Mr. Cash.
Real change.
The issue here is that there's no transparency in this decision. You've made an announcement assuming that there was some public announcement of the support of the mayor of Gatineau. Your decision about this museum was made, it seems, arbitrarily or with some friends in private. We had a long study of the Canada's 150th birthday. This was never brought up once. It was made. The decision was made after the fact. The announcement of the money to spend was made, and then a consultation began, which essentially the decision had already been made. So it's valid to ask you how often and for how long have you been working on this in secret, without the public's knowledge of this, and what's the connection? I mean, you seem to be very close to Mr. O'Neill. So how often do you meet? We've been trying to ask this question for many months in various forms. So I have you here, and I think it's germane to the conversation.
I probably speak to any of our museum presidents, including Mr. O'Neill, every month, maybe once a month. And there's no difference between Mr. O'Neill and the heads of any of other organizations. Second, on this issue of secrecy, this is such a secret plan that I shared it with my heritage critic from the NDP. This is such a secret plan that I shared it with the leader of the Green Party. It's such a secret plan that I told Scott. It's such a secret plan I told Jean Chrétien. My God, it's such a secret plan. I shared it with former board chairs. It's such a secret plan. I was very proud about it and to tell it all across this country over the past 9 months since we announced this plan. With regard to Mr. Bureau, I had the same conversation.
Are there records of your meetings with Mr. O'Neill? I mean, is there a log of the appointments? How often you two have discussed this? From when did you start discussing this, and for how long, and what was the nature of those discussions? It's just a simple question.
No.
Is there a log of that stuff?
I don't think so. I mean, he's not a lobbyist. He's a president of a museum, and
sure. And you decided to spend $26 million of taxpayer money on a museum which you've already described, the Canadian Museum of Civilization, aptly and perfectly today as a great museum. You've already described.
Yeah, that can be made better and improved upon. And look.
But there was no consultation with the public on this.
Look, Mr. Andrew, I didn't interrupt you at any point. Just let me answer some of the nonsense here. Look, I met with Mr. Watson in my office, and I asked him if he supported this idea. He said yes. He said thinks it's great. I believe he issued a public statement, and I asked him, can I publicly say that you support the museum? He said yes, absolutely. Had the exact same conversation with Mr. Bureau. I said, here's what we plan to do. Can I say publicly that you support this institution? He said, yeah, I think it's a great idea. So I publicly, I've said so. And you're right.
Great idea, or did he say you could say publicly that he supports it?
Yes, both.
Which?
Both. Look, I just...
Well, we're out of time, as interesting as this is. So, Minister, thank you for your time with us. We're going to suspend for 1 minute and let our next panel witnesses come to the table. Okay, we'll get started again, and from now till 5:30, we have with us Mr. Mark O'Neill, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Museum of Civilization, as well as David Morrison, Director of Research and Content, Special Project 2017, Exhibitions and Programs. Welcome to you two gentlemen. I believe the clerk has told you you'd have some time for opening remarks before we move into questions and answers. So with that, Mr. O'Neill, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, committee members. I greatly appreciate this opportunity to discuss Bill C-49 and the proposed establishment of the Canadian Museum of History. Je crois que les modifications suggérées renforceront les capacités.
I think the proposed changes will strengthen our institution and greatly enhance its contribution to the public life of this country, and in some very significant constructive ways. At the outset, however, I'd like to talk to you about some of the things that will not change and that have led to some debate and discussion in the media and elsewhere.
To present outstanding temporary exhibitions that illuminate world history and cultures. They will remain part of our mandate and an important part of our programming. In fact, we are currently working with colleagues in Greece on the production of a major exhibition about that country's ancient history. This exhibition, from Agamemnon to Alexander the Great, will feature over 500 exceptional artifacts and will be launched at the Royal Ontario Museum, our partner, next year, and will travel to Ottawa, Chicago, and then Washington. Second, we will maintain the ever-popular Canadian Children's Museum. Third, our First Peoples Hall and Grand Hall will continue to explore the historical achievements and contemporary contributions of Canada's Aboriginal peoples. They are the finest exhibitions of their kind in Canada, and so they shall remain as integral parts of the new museum should the legislation be passed into law. Finally, we will continue building our national collection and undertaking scholarly and other types of research, despite claims from some to the contrary. In fact, our National Collection Fund now totals $9 million, and in consultation with academics across the country, the corporation has developed a research strategy, the first in the museum's history. This strategy will guide the work of the museum in its research activities over the next 10 years. J'aimerais maintenant vous donner un aperçu du processus de participation.
I would like now to turn to the engagement process we use to solicit public input. The process began last October. We engaged with Canadians across the country, and we invited them to reflect on their history and on how it should be told in their own Canadian Museum of History. We created an interactive website and designed an online survey. We organized roundtable discussions in 9 Canadian cities from St. John's to Vancouver. We set up an interactive kiosk in many public places across the country. We organized meetings with school students and other diverse groups. And we also had questions placed on an independent opinion survey firm. Over 24,000 persons responded either directly or in online.
But I'm very happy to share with you, the members of this committee, some of what we have heard from Canadians. Canadians told us that visiting museums and historic sites and encountering real artifacts are by far their favorite ways of connecting with history. Many stress the unique role that museums play in educating children and youth and in providing shared learning opportunities for family and friends. Canadians have said they trust museums more than any other source of historical information, and they value museums for the way that they allow them to interact with each other and their common history. Yet, Mr. Chair, we've never had a museum that tells the pan-Canadian story from earliest times to present day. The Museum of Civilization has indeed been trying to fill that void, and it has been doing so despite a very different legislative mandate. Its central purpose, as described in the Museums Act, is to enhance understanding of cultural achievements and human behavior, not Canadian history and identity. Nevertheless, since at least 2005, and on the heels of the overwhelming success of our sister institution, the Canadian War Museum, the museum has been working to broaden and deepen its focus on Canadian history. It's been trying to do a better job of telling the story of this country and its people from a pan-Canadian perspective, and it's been working to share that story with as many Canadians as possible. Currently, the museum is a key center for historical research and scholarship, Through its artifacts, exhibitions, and its other programming, the museum explores many aspects of our country's past and disseminates the results of that research in many forms across the country, such as print publications and other forms of research. And all of this will continue under the new mandate. Le musée a accompli un travail remarquable et mené à bien des réalisations. The museum's work and achievements are very impressive, but there are also a number of serious shortcomings, which are most evident in our largest permanent gallery, the Canada Hall. A narrative history exhibition, inspired to some extent by the success of the streetscape of the Epcot Centre of Florida, museum staff designed the hall to offer a vision of Canada's social and economic history that moved temporally and geographically from 1000 AD in the Atlantic provinces to the present day in British Columbia and the Northwest Territories. And while that approach makes for an interesting and informative visit, it can't help but produce a disjointed and narrow picture of our country's dynamic past. In the Canada Hall, the regions of the country presented are frozen in time and exist entirely unto themselves. Whole categories of endeavor, politics, sport, culture, or contributions to the world, among others, are poorly covered or not covered at all. Women's history is, at best, peripheral, and the journey through time ends in the 1970s, so almost half a century of our history is left unexplored. Here, Mr. Chair, is the result. Walk through the Canada Hall, and you will learn about life in New France, but you'll find no mention of the Quiet Revolution or anything else about Quebec. You'll learn about the early whaling industry in Newfoundland, but nothing about why, how, or when the colony joined Confederation. You'll see recreations of grain elevators and oil rigs, but you won't learn about the phenomenon called Western alienation. Although modules on the rebellions in Upper and Lower Canada have been added very recently, Confederation itself is reduced to a multimedia timeline. You'll find no mention in Canada Hall of the flag debater Constitution, no mention of Paul Henderson's goal in Moscow, or the wartime internment of Ukrainian or Japanese Canadians. You'll find no reference to residential schools or peacekeeping, or Terry Fox and his Marathon of Hope. No meaningful reference to the Great Depression, the conscription crises, or even a hint as to where Canada might be headed. But perhaps the most egregious flaw in the Canada Hall itself is its starting point. If you've been there, you will know that its telling of our national story begins not with the arrival of First Peoples in time immemorial, but with the arrival of Europeans in the 11th century. Colonization as a term or concept is not mentioned in Canada Hall. C'est un problème auquel nous comptons remédier. This is an issue that we intend to correct. Canadians made it very clear to us during the public consultation process that the voices and experiences of First Peoples must have a place in any narrative of Canadian history. We want to focus more clearly all our attention on the telling of Canada's story in all its richness and complexity. And we believe that the task is best accomplished under a new mandate and a new name, a name that better reflects what we aspire to become. Of history. Number one, it will feature the largest and most comprehensive exhibition on Canadian history ever developed. The new permanent gallery will replace both the Canada Hall and the Canadian Personalities Hall. It will be the place where Canadians can go to retrace their national journey and encounter their national treasures. It's where they can go to learn about the people, events, and themes that shaped our country's development, define the Canadian experience, and underpin our national identity. It will include seminal events and episodes from our past and some of the greatest Canadian stories never told. We are also establishing, as you've heard earlier, a network of history museums across the country. Members of this network will have a permanent gallery devoted to the presentation of their exhibitions. Those exhibitions will complement and enhance our national narrative by adding regional content and perspectives. The new gallery will also broaden the reach and the profile of the contributing institutions. And members of this network will have better access to the national collection to enhance their own work. During the public engagement process, Canadians told us what they expect of those exhibitions and the museum in general. Especially the new Canadian History Hall, here are some highlights. Canadians want us to be comprehensive, frank and fair in our presentation of their history. They want us to examine both the good and the bad from our past. We were urged to foster a sense of national pride without ignoring our failings, mistakes, and controversies. Canadians want us to present various viewpoints and voices recognizing that people and events can be interpreted in different ways when seen through different eyes. They want us to connect with them on a personal level. They want to see themselves and their neighbors reflected in the museum, whatever their heritage, whenever they join the Canadian family, and wherever in this country they live. And they told us quite clearly not to ignore the world beyond our borders. Those comments, suggestions, and pleadings will inform our every decision going forward. The content, Mr. Chair, for this new exhibition is being developed by a multidisciplinary team of experts at the museum, led by Dr. David Morrison. This team includes researchers, curators, and museologists, in close collaboration with advisory committees comprised of historians and experts from across Canada. Creating the new gallery is going to be a major challenge. Our experts will first have to develop a comprehensive and cohesive storyline, which they have begun to do. They will have to identify the themes, events, and artifacts that merit inclusion in the gallery. They'll have to make some difficult choices and grapple with some very contentious issues. And they'll have to do it all in full knowledge that their every decision will be scrutinized by scholars, lay people, advocacy groups, the media, politicians, from coast to coast to coast. But our professional staff are the best in the country at what they do, and they're certainly up to the challenge. Mr. Chair, the call for a National History Museum is hardly recent. Over 60 years ago, the Royal Commission on National Development in the Arts, Letters and Sciences stated in its final report, "On the necessity for an historical museum, we can hardly speak too strongly." In 2003, the Government of Canada announced a $50 million plan to convert the Government Conference Centre in Ottawa into the Canadian History Centre. Mr. Chair, should Bill C-49 be passed into law, the corporation will create a museum worthy of Canadian support and deserving of their pride. Thank you. I look forward to your questions. Merci. Je répondrai à vos questions avec plaisir.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Now we'll move to our questions and answers. We'll begin with Mr. Richards for 7 minutes.
Good. Well, thank you very much for being here. Mr. O'Neill, seems to be some misconceptions about this bill, certainly on the other side of the table over here, at least anyway. And I wanted to take a moment to clarify a few of the points with you. Certainly, you know, when we had the minister here just prior to you, he was very clear that, you know, that you know, many of the decisions about the museum and its contents and its curatorial decisions would obviously remain in your hands at the museum. But the opposition seems to be sort of making, they're inferring at least anyway, that there's going to be some interference with the independence of the museum. And that's certainly what their inference is. I wondered if you can just tell us a little bit about C-49 and if it will still allow the Canadian Museum of History, as it will be called now, to maintain its curatorial independence. And if you could even indicate if that would be the same as the independence that's currently enjoyed by the current Canadian Museum of Civilization, as it's currently called. And if you could even point to the sections or the part of the Act that explains that particular.
Mr. Chair, I thank the member for the question. I'd like to begin answering the question in the following manner, and that is that I fully understand the concern about Canadians when changes are made to their memory institutions. I've been around a long time. I've been working in cultural and social policy for the Government of Canada since 1986. I've been in this museum corporation for 12 years. I was in the corporation when another government created a museum, when a government built the Canadian War Museum. And I saw that project from the ground up, and many of the same concerns and discussions were certainly central to that whole period as well. I think that those concerns are understandable. What works, and as the Minister of Canadian Heritage explained through Section 27 of the Act, is that the museum, just by its statutory nature, is a Crown corporation existing at arm's length from the Government of Canada. Ministers and governments make their views known in very broad ways, as a former government did about the need for a military history museum, as this government has about its desire to introduce a bill to Parliament, and here you are at second reading. The arm's length and the protection flows from the governance structure of the corporation, which is the role of the Board of Trustees in setting the strategic direction, which, as I think many of the members of this committee know, is a cornerstone of Crown Corporation governance. It appears in our corporate plan each year, and it is my task as the CEO of the corporation to respond to that strategic direction and demonstrate to the board operating on behalf of the Minister of the Government that we are indeed implementing it. My experience in the corporation is that the members of this committee and Canadians can be encouraged and assured that the museum will operate independently from the Government of Canada, and that the content of this new museum will be created by the content experts who work for us, who are museologists, curators, researchers, and historians.
That's obviously a pretty clear statement you just made there. There's also been some concerns that have been expressed about the new mandate and how it might not allow the museum to be able to conduct research or participate in international knowledge sharing. Can you tell us if that's the case?
The members of the committee studying this bill know, you know, I don't think I need to direct you, and I wouldn't, you know, with respect to Section 9, I believe it is, immediately following the mandate statement proposed in the Act, where research and collecting is discussed at length and the powers and authority of the museum. I understand that there is some concern that the words research and collecting aren't in the mandate statement. That's certainly beyond my purview in terms of your work. I can tell you that the museum is doing collecting and researching as we speak. I mentioned in my remarks we have a national collection fund of $9 million. We just literally, at the end of the last month, finalized a research strategy which will guide our activities. I see absolutely nothing in this bill, if that's your question, that would in any way prevent the museum from undertaking the research and the collecting that it currently does. In fact, it's explicitly set out in Section 9.
Okay, excellent. What about the ability to host international exhibitions? There's been some concern expressed there as well in the new mandate that would maybe be something that would not be able to be undertaken. Is that true?
The again, world cultures and history are specifically mentioned, I believe, in the mandate statement proposed in the Act. This has dogged us a little bit since day one. There was an early media report that said that the museum would no longer undertake international exhibitions and partnerships. At the actual press conference when the government made the announcement, we talked about the fact that we had begun discussing the Greek exhibition I just highlighted for you, and the museum will continue to host international exhibitions and develop international partnerships. It's critically important, and I believe that is explicitly referenced in the proposed mandate statement, which I think is Section 8 of the Act.
While we're on the topic of international exhibitions, in Budget 2012, our government actually increased the traveling exhibitions indemnification program to be able to help attract new exhibitions to Canada. So I wonder if you could just tell the committee a little bit about how that will help the museum to be able to bring in those international exhibitions.
I can also talk to you, Mr. Chair, as someone who used to manage that program. I worked in the Department of Canadian Heritage in that area for some 5 or 6 years and managed that along with several other programs. The indemnification program is, and as long as it is there, critically important to museums across the country, particularly those that wish to partner to host large international exhibitions. That's really the fundamental purpose of the indemnification program. And it's an extremely important program. For example, we would apply for indemnification along with the ROM in Toronto for the Greek exhibition that I mentioned. The indemnification program is absolutely critical to successful partnerships and particularly hosting and attracting large-scale international exhibitions.
I think there also seems to be some confusion by some of the members on the opposite side who seem to be making the claim that Canadians were somehow not consulted on this new museum. And I know you mentioned briefly in your opening remarks about some of the consultations that the museum itself undertook during the, I guess in the consultation phase here. I wonder if you could elaborate and expand on that a bit and tell us a bit more about some of the consultations that the museum itself undertook during the, regarding to the creation of the new Canadian Museum of History.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. The museum, I certainly can tell you that the museum went out for a period of about 4 months across the country from St. John's to Vancouver in 9 centres and met with groups of Canadians in those centres. We mounted kiosks in urban centres. We had an online survey, and I mentioned in my speech, we also had an independent opinion survey, or question and an opinion survey. Altogether, we've had about 24,000 Canadians participate in various ways in that consultation. And we took the consultation very, very seriously. The consultation was referred to earlier, the meeting earlier in Montreal, was in fact one of the most dynamic consultations with a very good panel discussion. very diverse panel discussion of young Quebecers, Anglophones and Francophones talking about the History Museum, which was very helpful to us. The information has already been given to Dr. Morrison and his team, and they're working that into the interpretive scenario, as we call it, or the storyline that we've begun to develop for the new museum. And we've taken the content it contains very seriously. I would simply add as well that in a parallel way, we also consulted with academics and scholars, and we felt that was critically important, right across the country, and they have helped us develop this new research strategy, which will also help inform the new exhibition hall. And I would finally mention that I'm pleased to tell you that as of recently, we have members of the Canadian Historical Association who have, and we're very pleased about this, accepted an invitation to work with us on our advisory committees in developing the content for the new Canadian History Hall.
Thank you very much.
And next we have Madame Boutine-Sweet for 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur O'Neill, comme vous le savez,
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As you may know, I have a few concerns with this bill. You've spoken of consultation or public engagement. These consultations were conducted once a decision had already been taken to change the mission of the museum. Did you consult with Canadians at large or museum specialists, archaeologists, for example, as to whether or not the mandate should be changed?
Mr. Chair, we did not ask Canadians if they thought that the mandate should be changed. Our view was that the government had introduced a bill in the House, that there was the likelihood of the bill becoming the law of the land. We felt that it was important to talk to Canadians about the kinds of things that they would like to see in their new history museum. We wanted to learn more about how Canadians might engage in their museum and the kinds of things that they thought might be important. In the public consultations, there were a number of Canadians who participated. There certainly were museologists and content experts.
Ma question n'était pas là. Je sais très bien qui vous avez consulté.
No, I'm aware of who you consulted after, but the decision came from the minister, and once that decision was taken, and no one else could really counter and say, no, we don't want to see a change in the mandated museum. I have a second question, and perhaps just a brief answer, yes or no would do. You have a code of ethics at the museum for the acquisition of material?
I would say that our collecting is guided by a number of policies that are common to museums across Canada and around the world. That would be an accurate answer. A specific code of ethics would be no.
D'accord. Alors, je continue ma question.
Very good. In 2012, you accepted to get some artifacts from the Empress of Ireland, and there was quite a bit of opposition to that because it was the results of pillage. Did you respect the comments or the guidelines made by the specialists, and what was the cost of the acquisition of this collection?
He's here to speak about about the bill that's before us. I don't think that he was advised to do his research and homework on other topics. He's here specifically on C49.
Directement à l'interférence.
So I'm wondering if you might
Les autres
make
ont
sure
posé
that
des questions sur l'interférence.
This is.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
If we could try and be specific on C49, that would be helpful. I know that the last time the President was here, members had an opportunity to talk about all kinds of different things, but the opposition decided to eliminate his time by try and pass motions. So right now we have an opportunity on C49. Let's do that. And if we want to have the President back on other things later, we can do that as well.
Okay. Mr. Calandra has made a point of order, but we do want, when we invite witnesses, we do want to focus on the subject matter to which we invited them. Generally, we allow a bit of latitude, but if you can bring it on to C49, and the point of order doesn't come out of your time, so you're all set.
C'est relié directement à l'interférence parce que...
This question links directly to interference. I want to know if there was interference. So who took the decision? Was it archaeologists that contributed their ideas to this? That's my question.
Your question, I think, Mr. The first part of the member's question was concerning the acquisition of the Empress of Ireland itself. First of all, I would suggest that Mr. Philippe Baudry, the diver, is considered legally to be the legal owner of the objects from the wreck, according to the receiver of wreck in Canada. The site of the Empress of Ireland was not designated by the Quebec Cultural Property Act, as I think you know, until 1999, long after Mr. Baudry finished collecting his objects. The Government of Canada, through the Cultural Property Export Review Board, long ago made a decision, in fact in 2001, that the objects were too important to the national cultural heritage of the country to even be exported out of Canada. The problem was that they would either be sold into private collections in Canada or some institution that had a mandate or a capacity to acquire the collection and preserve it would have to do so. After many years of negotiation, and involving incidentally and beginning with my predecessor, we were able to successfully acquire the objects for future generations. I would also add that although it is true that the acquisition of these kinds of artifacts can be, as you well know, controversial, there are many Canadians who are extremely pleased that we've acquired this collection, including a group of Canadians in Western Canada who call themselves the Committee for the Preservation, I believe, of the Artifacts from the Empress of Ireland.
Donc, si j'ai bien compris, les artefacts ont été acquis contre.
So these artifacts were acquired against the advice of museologists or archaeologists working in the museums, and I'll leave the rest of my time to Mr. Cash.
Seconds. So.
30 seconds. Well, it's a simple question. I guess how frequently and how often have you met with the minister over the last few years?
I was thinking about that when you were talking to the minister. With respect to this particular project, I've met with the minister twice.
I'm just saying, in general, how often?
I don't meet with the minister. I've met with the minister twice. I see the minister at events. I see him at exhibition openings.
He meets you once a month.
I don't think he said he met me once a month. I think he said he talks to me once a month, which is probably true.
Point of order.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. O'Neill. We didn't ask him to bring his date book with him. I mean, the line of questioning is almost ridiculous. It is ridiculous. Obviously, we're here on C-49. If they want to bring him back to ask to talk to him about his date book, they can do that at a different time. But our time is limited. Let's ask him about C-49, Mr. Chair. It's truly unfair to ask him what his date book had for the last 5 years that Minister Moore has been the minister.
Mr. Cash, as I said before, we do want to try and stay on C-49. You actually have 2 minutes. Sorry.
2 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to understand the sequence of events that led to the decision being made. I think it's appropriate to understand how often the minister is in touch with you. How often is he in touch with you, on the phone or in person or otherwise through email? How often do you two converse?
Mr. Chair, I see the minister at events in town, usually exhibition openings, citizenship court hearings at the Museum of Civilization at the War Museum. I think the last time I saw the minister would have been at the opening of the Star Wars Identity exhibition at the Aviation Museum. I go to all of these events. I do not have regular meetings with the Minister of Canadian Heritage. I met with him twice on this particular project. I do not regularly speak to the minister or meet with the minister, but I certainly see him a lot because, as you know, he's a very active minister. He has his films and other nights here in Ottawa. I see him around town frequently, and he's often at the national museums and other cultural institutions in Ottawa.
Okay, so I am a little confused then when he said once a month, about once a month. What was he referring to?
Mr. Chair, you'd have to recheck with the minister.
Okay.
I thought I heard him say, and perhaps I'm mistaken, Mr. Cash, I thought I heard the minister say that he thinks he speaks to me about once a month. I certainly don't meet with the Minister of Canadian Heritage once a month.
I said speaking on the phone and email or face to face.
Mr. Cash, if you want to, you got to bring it on to C-40.
Well, I would bring it on to C-40.
Yeah, I have a point of order. I mean, Mr. O'Neill was quite clear. He sees them at the minister at events that we're all at, and wow, go figure, they might actually talk to each other at an event that they come across with each other. He's not here to discuss his date book. If we could bring it back to C-49 just for 30 seconds. If they have no more questions of Mr. O'Neill with respect to C-49, then let's move on. We have a lot of questions for the president, and we could get some value out of this.
Cash, you have 33 seconds.
This is about how the decisions were made. It's about transparency, and it's about the independence of the museum. And I think they're appropriate questions to ask. And it's also, I'm still unclear what the answer is. You speak with him on the phone. You exchange emails sometimes, and you sometimes meet formally. How, like, aggregate? How often is that?
I would not be able to tell you that, Mr. Cash. The most I see the minister is socially at exhibition.
I heard you say that already, but you do speak on the phone with him often?
No, I don't. I don't speak on the phone often to Minister Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Cash. Next, we have Mr. Sims for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. There's quite a list here of the events that you'd like to illustrate as part of the story that is Canadian. You know, it seems like we're overbrimming here with all kinds of events that we could put out there. And I'm not saying that you're nefarious in any which way, shape, or form. I'm just saying that it's quite a bit. When you and the minister spoke, were some of these are ideas that you fleshed out as to what it was you wanted to explain, or more, or something else?
I've never had any discussion with the minister about the content of the exhibition. What we've talked to the minister about are sort of some of the kinds of broad themes that are not present in the Canada Hall, as I've discussed in front of the committee today, and the sorts of themes that we think should be there in a broad Canadian historical exhibition. We've yet to develop the storyline for that exhibit. That's up to Dr. Morrison and his staff. But I've never had any discussion about any of the specific content that would be in the new Canadian History Hall. We certainly talked about some of the broad kinds of historical themes that are missing, the kinds of things that I laid out for you today. Yes.
One of the things that the minister spoke of was, you know, the updating of current exhibitions. Would you feel that the exhibition regarding First Nations needs updating, and does that involve expanding its presence within the museum?
Thank you very much for the question. Mr. Chair, I'd say that there are in the exhibition, just to be clear, in the museum there are 2 permanent exhibitions dealing with First Nations. The first is a grand hall, the large room with the totem poles. The second is the First Peoples Hall behind it. And in fact, there is a third. There are small houses behind the grand hall. We have just finished completing upgrading the houses behind the grand hall as part of standard museum work that are in no way related to this project. We would like to be able at some point in the future to update and bring in additional aspects of First Nations history into the First Peoples Hall at some point as part of regular museology, museum update that we would like to do over the next several years. But these are not related to this project. This would be part of the regular maintenance and research and exhibitory update that a museum would be expected to do.
Just to very quickly, yeah, you do lay out a lot of examples here as such, and there's 2 aspects of this. First, I want to deal with the legislation. There are 2 different ways. Something's been omitted here. It's been a word. I know the minister said it's just a word, but for some reason I'm stuck on it because it is different. It says here in the original wording of the Museum of Civilization says interest in, knowledge, and critical understanding. In the second version, in the new version, it says to enhance Canadians' knowledge, understanding, and appreciation of events. So the word critical is not in there. Is there a difference there?
I don't know, and Mr. Chair, I can tell the members of the committee that I don't know why the word critical is not there. I'm not sure why that word is not in the mandate statement.
Something, right? If you have a critical understanding, it's a part of the critique. It's like an academic function. Is that correct to say?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that would be up to interpretation. I'm not sure. If your question is, does the jettisoning of the word critical somehow dilute the importance of those particular issues, understanding and knowledge, I'm not sure that it does. I can certainly tell you that, in my opinion, the impact of this bill in its entirety on the museum would not in any way change the nature of the scholarly research and the dissemination of knowledge that the museum undertakes. I don't see that at all in this bill.
Let me move very quickly. I want to move to this concept, which I think is, and it actually can work outside of the legislation itself, which is the sharing of the artifacts with the rest of the country. Now, I like that idea. I think it's fantastic. The minister mentioned the rooms in Newfoundland and Labrador. Great. Museums on the West Coast. But this seems to be, this is brand new stuff, isn't it? I mean, this is brand new for you. This is brand new. And how is this going to function?
There is a, so I'll try to be brief, but I do want to sort of applaud and pay tribute to one of our sister institutions, the Museum of Nature. The Museum of Nature actually perfected an alliance of natural history museums. They've done it very, very well. It's existed for about a decade or a decade and a half. We've looked at that. In our situation, most of our partnerships have been one-offs, so it'll be a traveling exhibition, artifact loans, those kinds of things. We're very excited, as are some of the museums that have already signed on to this whole notion of developing some kind of a cooperative approach to sharing history. Let me give you one example. I'm going to talk about a small museum, the Timmins Museum in Northern Ontario. We have a very small exhibition there right now. The Timmins Museum is a very, very small museum. They would like to become a part of this network. What will be enough for the Timmins Museum will be able to borrow from us 1 or 2 or 3 artifacts or a very, very small exhibition, and they will be able to contribute some of their material to our work.
Sorry to interrupt. Yep. Time is tight. Who pays for that? Like, well, what's the financial burden on a very small museum? Are they able to punch above their weight? And
we have absolutely no misconceptions about that. We know that the majority of museums in this country are not going to be able to contribute a great deal of financial capacity to this project. We're much aware of that. We are right now mounting a fundraising campaign to try and raise some money to help us do this.
So that's not part of the $25 million?
$25 million is going right to the renovations and the redevelopment of the 2 halls that we spoke about. We've also committed to raising an extra $5 million.
So you're going to raise money to allow these smaller museums access to that money to get artifacts from your institution?
We are going to be able to reallocate some of our resources internally to help do that, and we also think that this particular network will lend itself very well to sponsorship. So we're looking at a variety of ways in which sponsorship for the network to function. Private sponsorship, that's right.
Sure, I got that, but what about in like Timmins?
Yeah. Timmins, how does that work? Well, we're hoping that if we're able to raise some funds, we'll be able to assist the smaller museums as they participate in this network.
But none of that money, that $25 million, is going to help these people get some of those artifacts that you have on display in your museum.
The $25 million is slated for the renovation and the redevelopment of those 2 halls.
Yeah, see, I have small concerns about that, like, because I would love for the smallest of museum to find itself on even keel with the larger museums in the larger center. It seems to me that if you're in a larger center, then you'd have an advantage over getting this material. But you want to help these smaller museums out.
Absolutely. Yeah, and they're eager to be part of this network.
But through private.
If we can secure private sponsorship to help us do that, that will be extremely helpful to us in terms of offsetting costs. We do not intend to place any financial burden on the smaller museum institutions. That's not what we intend to do, and they're eager to participate in that. We, at the beginning of this project, are going to have to work out the ways in which we will be able to finance this, but we believe that we will be able to do it through a reallocation of some of our resources and through some private sponsorship activities.
Thank you.
Next, we will move to Mr. Calandra.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate you coming here, and I appreciate all the information that you shared with us today. The Minister talked earlier about support of the Mayor of Ottawa, as well as the Mayor of Gatineau. In fact, the Mayor of Gatineau said, "Cette décision n'est une pas dans la bonne direction. Je pense qu'il n'y a pas lieu."
Decision is a step in the right direction, and we're very excited about it.
Helpful when 2 of the most important partners with respect to drawing people to this brand new museum are so favorable to it and are actually excited about this. As part of actually building a consensus, which is also on top of the extraordinary outreach that you've done. I wonder if you could just talk about that, continuing to consult with Canadians as we move forward.
Thank you very much again for the question. We believe that the Museums History Network will allow us an opportunity in a more concerted way than ever before to reach Canadians where they live. I just want to give you a sample of some of the institutions that immediately signed on, did not hesitate to become part of this cooperative form of network. The Royal British Columbia Museum in Victoria several months ago. The Rooms has agreed in Newfoundland to sign on, has already been mentioned. The Museum of Man in Winnipeg, in fact, just last week became a part of this partnership. Many smaller museums across the country, and I have a list of about a dozen or so other museums that are hoping to participate. The McCord Museum in Montreal, for example, and many others. What this will allow us to do is to collaborate on museological projects over the long term, and that has not happened before for our museum corporation. So things like research projects, joint public programming, all of which does not have to be in the National Capital Region. We will be able to do that with new partners across the country in ways we haven't been able to do it before. We're also looking at partnering with institutions that are not necessarily museums, centers of excellence in one region, community federations perhaps in another. We're attempting to build all of these relationships. We want to expand the national footprint of our museums, the War Museum and the Museum of Civilization, so that they really are national in scope as opposed to federal. And we have a lot of work to do in that regard, and we think that the network lends itself as a strategic opportunity for us to do this by building ongoing long-term relationships that are reciprocal that do not exist now.
Just the remainder of my time to Mr. Bowen, please.
Thank you, Chair, and let me add my voice of welcome to our two guests. We're pleased that you're able to share part of your afternoon with us because it's good to hear how the project is coming and you have first-hand knowledge. And we'll leave the date book and the English lesson and distribution of displays for another day and maybe get back to concentrating on the museum. It seems to me that the museum has been in the planning stages for a number of years now. It's going to update a museum that is at least 20 years old, and it will indeed be a great opportunity to have a fresh start in the museum. Could you share a little of what the plans are for that, first of all?
Just make sure I understand the question. The sort of planning forward, what the
right.
So, are you looking at in particular what the new exhibition itself might look like, or?
Yes, like are you looking at 10-year cycles with history tied in? You know, people say museums are a visual history of a country, or are we looking at a broader time frame? And
I wonder, Mr. Chair, if I might ask Dr. Morrison to answer that question. Would that be allowable? My colleague, David, would you like to?
Sure. I'm just trying to make sure I understand it. We do have right now a temporary exhibition program that goes to 2018, 2019, where we're filling in the slots of what kind of shows either produced within our museum or borrowed and worked on in collaboration with other museums that we're going to bring in. We have, of course, this big History Hall initiative, and it's scheduled to open on the 1st of July, 2017, for the 150th anniversary of Confederation. After that, we have been tasked with when planning out this hall, to make it reprogrammable, to make it changeable, to make it the kind of hall that we can update as things move along, as historicity changes, but also to move in, integrate new events so that it doesn't become immediately out of date. The current plan right now is to bring the storyline of Canada right up to the year of opening, and nothing ages faster than current events. So we have to program this sort of thing into the hall. At the same time, we're under no illusions that a hall like this might not also, by some act of some future parliament, 10 or 20 or hopefully 100 years from now, nothing lasts forever, even permanent exhibition galleries.
Right.
I wonder if I could just add briefly to that, if the member wouldn't mind. I think part of your earlier question was sort of, you know, when did all of this start and how long did these kinds of visions take place? In actual fact, John English's name was mentioned here earlier. When I joined the corporation as corporate secretary in 2001, Dr. English, former Liberal member of Parliament for Kitchener, had been the chair of the Board of Trustees, and he was until 2005. And Dr. English, in fact, began talking about the need to bring more broad historical themes into the Canadian Museum of Civilization, even back then. And it's one of the reasons today that he's agreed to be one of our advisors and one of our advisory groups in this project. So the evolution of the museum into becoming a national history museum really has its antecedents really well over a decade ago in the Museum Corporation.
In the planning, will Aboriginal people be represented, and will the display represent them in historical concepts as other folks are represented?
Again, thank you for the question. The first part is that we do have Aboriginal historians involved in the project, now actively involved. And as I mentioned earlier in my remarks, Aboriginal history will be a part of the national narrative in the museum, fully and completely within the new national narrative that we developed to tell the complete history of Canada.
And just as a matter of being curious, what will you do with a number of your displays that you've had in place for a while? They're going to be replaced, and as you said, David, nothing lasts forever. What will become of those artifacts?
One of the things we're trying to do now is to decide which parts of the Canada Hall we want to keep, that we can reprogram and that we can fit into the new mandate, the new vision for the space. And I can tell you right now that we have more or less decided, because it's not yet cast in stone, but the St. Onufrius Church, which you may know, the Ukrainian church, which is it's the largest artifact we own. It's a real consecrated church. And we've decided that it's going to stay in the hall, for instance. I guess we've also decided that the Nishka Girl, which is a West Coast fishing trawler, is not going to make its way through the new iteration because, well, it left the building last week for a new home with a National Historic Site in British Columbia. So we found a good home for it. But that's very much the issue, is what do we want to keep and what can we reprogram? There are wonderful architectural spaces in there that we'd like to keep, like the Ontario Streetscape or the New France Square. But can we tell a different and more coherent story, keeping that architecture in place?
If I may just quickly add to that.
Mr. O'Neill, we're just out of time for that round, and you might be able to pick it up before the end, but Madam Turmel, welcome to our committee, and I think the rest of the time is yours.
Oui, puis je vais le partager avec mon collègue, Monsieur.
Thank you, and I'll share with Mr. Nantel, if I may. You spoke of refocusing, repositioning the museum as such. I'd like to know what the impact is going to be on the rotating exhibitions, the space that's reserved for those, and the amount of money you're doing to draw big exhibitions.
By rotating, do you mean the international exhibitions?
Yeah.
Okay. As I mentioned in my remarks earlier, we intend to continue to have international exhibitions. Those partnerships are extremely important to us. We're actually planning now several years out. We have Greece coming next year, and in 2 years' time, we have a Vikings exhibition coming from the National Museum of Sweden, for example. We will continue to have those international exhibitions. And I'm sorry, the second part of your question?
Montant investi par rapport à ce qu'il va avoir.
Will there be an impact on the amounts invested in either permanent or temporary?
We do not perceive any sort of a detrimental impact on the funds that we would set aside for hosting international exhibitions. However, I must add that, and as you know, even from some of the recent media coverage about some of our exhibitions, we put aside, each international exhibition has a wide variety of cost factors attached to it. Some of them can be based on the complexity of the artifacts for travel. Some of it can be based on, frankly speaking, just the value of even the rental of the exhibition. So there are many factors. It can be very difficult to predict, but we have no intention of in any way diminishing our budgets for hosting international exhibitions.
Merci. Je vais demander à mon confrère de continuer.
Thank you. I'm going to share my time with Mr. Nautek. Thank you very much, Madam Tomel. Mr. O'Neill, Mr. Morrison, thank you very much for your attendance here today. You can see that there's quite a bit of interest in the issues here, given the public, and the people who are here are very interested. And 5 witnesses after your appearance is not really all that many, and I'd like to present a motion that we extend by 2 sessions our study of this bill in order to hear from more witnesses. I'd like to be able to take a decision on that as quickly as possible, so to extend our hearings by 2 meetings on this bill. Now, I do have a question for you, sir, on the nature of what you have evoked, the potential for expansion.
That, do you want to repeat what you said?
Bien sûr. Donc, que le comité prolonge de 2 séances.
That the committee extend by 2 sessions the study of Bill C-49 in order to hear more witnesses.
Extend our study of Bill C-49 by 2 meetings, 2 2-hour meetings? Okay. Any discussion on the motion, Mr. Calandra?
Just to confirm, I mean, this is a difficult one because of discussions that were held, obviously, in camera. I guess is the motion actually in order?
Yeah, it's in order.
Without betraying any confidence, discussed in camera, Mr. Chair. So. If it is in order, look, we gave the opposition a great deal of opportunity to present witnesses and opportunity to discuss the length of time of these presentations and these hearings. So based on those conversations, both in public and in private, we will obviously not be supporting that motion.
If there's more speakers on this, I see it. If there's more speakers on it, this particular panel was scheduled to wrap up at 5:30, so I'm going to dismiss this panel, and we will start with the next panel once we finish up with this bit of committee business. So, Mr. O'Neill, Mr. Morrison, thank you to both of you. Mr. Cash.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure what my colleague is talking about in terms of opportunity in public to discuss this. This is the first opportunity we've had in public to discuss this. And as per other discussions, I think, those were discussions which we're not party to talk about. That said, clearly, there's a lot of questions to be answered here. We have been given 1 day to question witnesses. That's not enough. The Canadian people deserve a more thorough going over of this bill, especially considering the fact that it was never discussed in our committee study. We're relegated to 1 day of witnesses. Surely we owe the Canadian people a more thorough discussion and witness testimony about this issue. It's been an issue that Canadians right across the country have been engaged in, and we're stuffing it all in one session. It doesn't seem to be the way that we should be proceeding on this bill. In fact, on any bill, really. But on one where we're talking about the key key Canadian Museum of Civilization, the most the most popular museum in the capital region, and the jewel in the crown of our museum system, that we give 1 session to witnesses.
Well, we're chewing into that witness time now, so unless there's further discussion, we'll move to a vote on the motion. Or
I don't know if discussion. Well, yeah, a bit of discussion. I don't know if this is in order or not, but I'm sure you'll tell me if it's not. I would be more than pleased to make public the discussions that happened in camera with unanimous consent with respect to the time given to this testimony. If the opposition would agree with if that's even allowed. I think that would help explain to the Canadian people why we have these set of meetings today. I would have no problem with that.
Well, we have a motion of Mr.
We do have a motion.
Cash, so we'll move to a vote on it unless there's further discussion. Mr. Calandra?
Yeah, just a friendly amendment then that we also then, if allowable, and I'll wait for the clerk's interpretation of that we make public the the content of what was decided upon that led to these hearings today.
Mr. Nantel.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, all the discussions that we have in camera should in fact be held in public, so we'd be pleased if they were. For those who are with us in the room today, they would have been very pleased to share their expertise and perspectives on that today. Many of those here assembled, if the rules that allowed, which probably they don't, but if somebody would like to come to the table and explain their point of view, I'm sure we'd have a lot of people accepting that offer. Why not give the word to those who are stakeholders, who are interested, who have something at stake in the game?
Mr. Cash has moved a motion, which we're debating now, so the sooner we can get to a vote on that, the sooner we can call our witnesses.
Specifically on that motion while we wait for an interpretation.
On the motion of Mr. Cash,
it was Mr.
on the
Nantel.
motion of Mr. Nantel that we extend by two sittings the study of this bill. Those in favor of the motion by Mr. Nantel? Okay. Those opposed? The motion is defeated. At this
Then I'm not sure if the clerk can tell us if there is an ability for us to make public what took place in camera with respect to this, what the procedure would be for that.
Things that are done in camera are kept private and in camera.
No, I appreciate
that. With the unanimous consent of the committee, we could do that. We could make it public.
That's my question.
If every member of the committee consented to it. So are you asking for unanimous consent?
Then I would ask then for unanimous consent of the committee to make public.
No, I think it should. Are you asking just for the?
I'll to make public the discussions and the voting with respect to the length of time and to the witnesses that were suggested.
Entire meeting, Mr. Calanders.
I'm okay with that.
All right, Mr. Calanders is asking for unanimous consent that we make the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held in camera, public. Is it? We need unanimous consent. Is there unanimous consent? Mr. Cash.
So first of all, I think I would like to just get clarification about this. And then I would like to have a pause while I discuss this with my colleagues. But first, can we just, are we in order here?
Suspend for a moment, Mr. Chair, would be okay.
Yeah, there's really nothing. I've just clarified that with unanimous consent, we can make what was said at the in-camera meeting public. So is there unanimous consent?
No, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Cash?
Before we move to that, I'd like to have a small pause with my team.
Well, what we're going to do at this point then is we will suspend for a few minutes. Committee members, because this was a 4-hour meeting, there is food at the back if you'd like it. Take a washroom break if you like, and we will reconvene in 5 minutes. Okay, we will resume our meeting. Mr. Calandra?
Oh, yeah, he's got the floor. Let him have the floor.
Mr. Cash, go ahead.
Well, first I'd like to say that we have been arguing to limit the use of in-camera sessions since we got here in 2011. So this is great news. Finally, the government has listened to us in regards to transparency. That's fantastic. So we have no problem with being open in all of these meetings in the future and retroactively. So I'd like to move a friendly motion that we release all the transcripts for all the meetings that we've had in camera in this committee in the past, and that we in the future keep our meetings in public. All of our meetings in public. So that's my friendly amendment to the motion.
Yeah, I don't consider that a friendly amendment at this point.
Mr. Chair, I have to challenge.
We can deal with that. That's no problem. But
but this is the motion. This is a friendly. I have to challenge the chair on this, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Cash, it's not a friendly amendment. It's not in order. It's a separate motion which you are free to make. Mr. Calandra, are you done?
Well, maybe with your advice, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Because if this isn't deemed a friendly amendment, we have seen motions come before this committee, and members have introduced friendly amendments to them. And so, with your advice, with your counsel, how does one extend the period of the release of the in-camera transcripts? That's what I would like to do. I would like to say, yes, we agree with the spirit of this. We'd like to extend this spirit to all of the meetings that we've had and the meetings that we've had in the future.
That's very easily done.
Okay, great.
All you need to do would be to move a motion to that effect. What I'm saying is you can't attach that to Mr. Calandra's motion. You could have your own motion. Right now we're dealing with Mr. Calandra's motion. Is there any, Mr. Calandra?
Just to be clear, because I may have got the date wrong, but it's the minutes of the meeting held Wednesday, May 29th.
Okay. Wednesday, May 29th. That's Wednesday of last week.
Yeah.
I would Well, number one, I'm going to ask for the indulgence of our panel here. We're not going to keep you over time. We do have a bit of committee business that has come up, so let's try to get to our panel as quickly as possible, members of the committee. Mr. Calandra has asked for unanimous consent that the minutes of the in-camera meeting of May 29th, which I will remind members, when we're discussing the motion, we cannot discuss the contents of the meeting. We all know that because it was in camera. But the minutes of the meeting of May 29th be made public. That's your motion? Mr. Cash on the motion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to attempt a friendly amendment, which is that I believe we had 2 meetings specific to this study, and so I'd like to move a friendly amendment that we include we include both the meetings in this motion.
Okay, Mr. Cash is moving a friendly amendment that would add Monday, June 4th, June 3rd, the minutes.
The date, but
yeah,
it
would be June 3rd.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Cash is moving a friendly amendment that we would add the minutes of Monday, June 3rd. Discussion on the amendment.
I know he needs unanimous consent to amend my motion. I'm not going to give him unanimous consent to do that. I think the minutes of Wednesday, May 29th, will speak for themselves, Mr. Chair, and I'm prepared to vote on that and release them to the public. That's when the sorry, I just that's well, I guess I'm not allowed to say, but the minutes will speak for themselves.
Yeah, Mr. Nantel.
Effectivement, on n'a pas le droit de dire.
Well, of course, we're bound to not talk about what we were talking about then, but on the point of principle, I don't see how you can do the minutes of the meeting, but not the minutes of the other one on the same subject, and there's a missing piece. Why?
We can do as many as we want, but we're dealing now with the motion of Mr. Calandra that we release publicly the minutes of the in-camera meeting of May 29th. Is there unanimous consent, Mr. Cash?
And again, forgive me, Mr. Chair, for my lack of total understanding of the procedure, but for my friendly amendment, could we have a vote on that amendment, please?
Yeah, we could have a vote.
Thank you. Thank you.
But you would need, it would still need unanimous consent. We could have a vote to add.
To add the second day. Thank you.
We would need unanimous consent for the motion.
Could we have a recorded vote on that then?
That's good. So we need unanimous consent to add the. Yeah. I think what we'll do, we will stick, because of the nature of this, and this isn't something that we deal with oftentimes, we will deal with, if you want to move a separate motion, we can do that. But for now, we are just going to deal with the motion of Mr. Calandra. He's seeking unanimous consent that the minutes of May 29th meeting be released. Is there the unanimous consent of the committee members to release the minutes from our in-camera meeting of May 29th? Well, there you go. That was easy. Okay, we will. Mr. Cash.
Thank you.
June 30. Restart, Mr. Cash.
Thank you.
The clerk will endeavor to see how we do this, but we will make the minutes available publicly of the in-camera meeting of May 29th. That would be the transcript, and basically be the transcript. Mr. Cash. June 30.
Well, I'd first like to move a motion that we release the transcript of the other meeting. It makes sense that if we're going to actually the second meeting that we had around
June 3rd, okay. Mr. Cash is asking for unanimous consent that we make public the transcript of our in-camera meeting of June 3rd. Is there unanimous consent for that motion?
Yeah. No.
Yes. There is no consent. Okay.
Wow.
We're done. Now we will move on to our witnesses.
Democracy lives.
Thank you for your indulgence, witnesses. Thank you for appearing before us. From the Canadian Museums Association, John McAvity, welcome, Executive Director. Kirsten Evenden, Vice President. From the Canadian Association of University Teachers, James L. Turk, Executive Director, welcome. As an individual, Victor Rabinovich, Fellow and Adjunct Professor, School of Policy Studies, Queen's University. Welcome to you, sir. From the Canadian Anthropology Society, Lauren Hollyoak, President. From the Historical Dominion Institute, Anthony Wilson Smith, President. Welcome to all of you. We will begin with our rounds of opening statements. We will begin as you appear on the list here, and we'll begin with the Canadian Museums Association. You have 10 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, that was quite an enjoyable lesson in parliamentary procedure. The Canadian Museums Association, or CMA, is delighted to be here to provide our advice and commentary on Bill C-49. We are the national not-for-profit association for museums, art galleries, and related institutions across Canada. We have members, almost 2,000 members located in every province and territory of this country, all of which are dedicated to preserving Canada's cultural heritage and presenting it to the public. Together, these museums welcome close to 60 million visitors per year. They range from large metropolitan art galleries to small community volunteer-run centres. CMA strongly supports Bill C-49, an act to amend the Museums Act. The mandate and roles expressed in this legislation are consistent with the roles of museums in society. Je voudrais vous présenter aujourd'hui maintenant Kirsten Evenden.
I'd like to introduce you to Kirsten Evenden, who comes from Calgary, and Director of the Glenbow Museum, and currently Vice President of our association. Kirsten? Thank you very much. Good day and good afternoon, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on Bill C-49.
Devoted to their history and heritage. There are numerous examples we could cite today. A couple are, for example, the fascinating Te Papa Museum in Wellington, New Zealand, that features First Nations history and culture, as well as heritage for that country. The Smithsonian in Washington, another well-known example, embraces a broad approach to presenting United States history, from grand achievements all the way through to everyday Americans. We're confident at the Canadian Museums Association that the new Canadian Museum of History will paint a similarly broad picture of this diverse and complex country. Canadian history is many things. It's major events, it's sometimes war, it's sometimes major significant historical figures, prime ministers, monarchs, but it is also about those things that relate to the everyday, the small h history that we all know and live ourselves. The history of the everyday and the extraordinary. The Canadian Museum of History is really a place where Canadians will be able to explore all of these diverse aspects of who we are and what we want to become. Starting initially by exploring First Nations issues from both contemporary and historical perspectives, and indeed contemporary events that relate to historical circumstances. Sometimes these events are important but challenging. For example, an internment camp in Minto, New Brunswick, the FLQ crisis, the Winnipeg riots. These are all aspects of who we are and where we've come from. And knowing history contributes to the quality of life in this country and supports rich, creative, and scientific achievements of our nation. Our history is therefore multidimensional, whether expressed and preserved through artifacts, art, documents, or science, and it's vital that this rich heritage be properly presented in this museum. It's a place that we will all connect with each other through these stories. We note Section 9 in particular, which gives clarity to the powers and capacity of the new Canadian Museum of History and details its mandate in terms of collections, research, and preservation. We note subsection I, which outlines the creation of opportunities to work with other partner museums across Canada. Again, as someone who has lived in 3 Canadian provinces in this country and worked in all these 3, I certainly think that this is something that the National Museum will really be an encouraging partner with all of these regions to gain further historical research across the country. These regional stories that can become a part of this network will certainly contribute to talking about who we are and where we want to go. Over and above the legislation, we're very pleased with the proposals within this clause and the intentions of the new museum to move forward. The creation of a network between museums across the country is indeed timely and was outlined by the President and CEO of the museum just last week before 250 colleagues, museum colleagues from across the country at our annual meeting of the CMA in Whitehorse, Yukon. In a time of budget restraints, sharing resources is more important than ever. This is a terrific opportunity to more easily exhibit our country's history, not only in museums across Canada through partnerships, which will be extremely beneficial to the entire country, but also here in Ottawa as a national showpiece. It'll provide a platform to easily distribute the large amounts of often unseen artifacts of importance currently in storage. In addition, the partnership role to be assumed by the Canadian Museum of History will provide positive guidance to other institutions across Canada. Finally, the plans call for a special gallery to be created at the new museum where other museums can provide exhibits from their local communities representing where history really happened, providing a national platform for telling our regional stories. Over 2,800 museums across Canada tell our country's collective story. Connecting them through a major national institution will greatly benefit museums and the Canadians who they serve and who visit them. This may well be a role model for other national museums, which cannot work in isolation from other aspects of the cultural fabric of our country. We wish to thank the members of the committee for their time and consideration on this matter. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Is that it for your opening? Great. Now we will move to Mr. Turk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to be here on behalf of the Canadian Association of University Teachers. We represent 68,000 academic staff at 124 universities and colleges across the country. We're deeply troubled by Bill C-49. The Canadian Museum of Civilization is a great museum, the most popular in the country and arguably the best. It's certainly one I'm proud to take every visitor who comes to Ottawa to see. The proposed Canadian Museum of History will be something less. Not only does Bill C-49 ensure a lesser institution, the process of consultation has been disappointing at best. In the case of CUT, our organization, which raised some concerns initially, we are very pleased that the CEO, Mark O'Neill, the Vice President of Research and Exhibitions, Jean-Marc Blais, and the Director of Archaeology and Research, David Morrison, willingly agreed to meet with us and did spend more than an hour talking with us and indicated there would be an opportunity for consultation. This was back in October. In February, Mr. Blais was in touch again to say that there would be a process of consultation involving us, and we've never heard a thing. The Canadian Historical Association, the Canadian Anthropological Association, the Canadian Anthropological Society wrote a letter on the same matter to Mr. O'Neill on May 6, 2013. I'd be happy to give the clerk a copy. On behalf of our respective associations, we write to express our serious concern regarding the lack of extensive or systematic engagement of the professional community of historians, anthropologists, and archaeologists in the CMC's planning for the proposed Canadian Museum of History. Unless redressed through significant and meaningful consultation with the professional heritage community, we fear this lack of engagement will critically compromise both the quality and credibility of the new museum. I mentioned the concern about consultation because there are serious flaws in the bill, and I'd like to just address a few of those and be happy to expand in the question period that follows. The first is the change in the purpose of the museum. The current mandate since 1990 of the Canadian Museum of Civilization is quite clear and quite impressive. I'll just quote a relevant section. To increase throughout Canada and internationally interest in, knowledge, and critical understanding of, and appreciation and respect for human cultural achievements and human behavior, by establishing, maintaining, and developing for research and posterity a collection of objects of historical and cultural interest with special but not exclusive reference to Canada, and by demonstrating those achievements and behavior, the knowledge derived from them, and the understanding they represent. That's been replaced by a much shorter mandate that may superficially sound similar but is fundamentally different. The proposed mandate in Bill C-49, the relevant section says, to enhance Canadians' knowledge, understanding, and appreciation of events, experiences, people, and objects that reflect and have shaped Canadian history and identity, and also to enhance their awareness of world history and cultures. The CMC, unlike the proposed change, the CMC mandate makes clear that it is a knowledge-generating organization, like all great museums. The proposed mandate for the Canadian Museum of History eliminates all reference, for example, to maintaining a collection for research and posterity. It removes Section 9F of the current mandate, or in the current bill, in the bill that established the Canadian Museum of Civilization, which is particularly troubling. The part that's been removed is, and I quote, undertake and sponsor any research, including fundamental or basic research and theoretical or applied research related to its purpose and to museology, and to communicate the results thereof. To our mind, these changes clearly indicate that the research and knowledge advancement function of the museum is under threat. The removal of critical understanding and replacing it with understanding is one concern. I mean, promoting critical understanding of history is an essential goal of any great museum. Providing visitors with critical understanding of history means offering them an opportunity to consider different points of view, the opportunity to critically analyze the past, and to re-examine traditional viewpoints rather than simply venerating national heroes. Another indication that the research and knowledge-generating role of the museum is being replaced with it becoming a display site is the elimination of the position of Vice President of Research and it being combined into the job of Vice President Exhibitions. A second concern of ours is a limited perspective of history. The new act will replace the museum's emphasis on human cultural achievements and human behavior with, quote, events, experiences, people, and objects that reflect and have shaped Canadian history and identity. It's a troubling emphasis on dates, heroes, and objects, an approach that historians have moved well beyond. The great man, great woman version of history risks leaving out the experience of the vast majority of Canadians. The stories and experiences of ordinary people and events that don't fit into the political biography model will be marginalized, just as they currently have been celebrated in the Canadian Museum of Civilization. Other concerns are the elimination or marginalization of the history and culture of First Nations people, issues of colonization, industrialization, gender relations, migration, environmental transformation, and so forth. This refocusing and rebranding, which will involve the gutting of the Canada Hall, a remarkable permanent exhibition of Canadian social history. And what's curious, the Canada Hall cost over $50 million to create, and yet the total budget for the new transformation of the new museum is only $25 million. So how they're going to recreate the vast social history that's currently reflected in the museum, as well as do other things, is totally beyond us, especially when that $25 million is not just for that, but for lots of other things. Minister Moore, for example, recently indicated that $25 million was also going to include the cost of agreements to establish a nationwide museum artifact lending network, which he described as having more than 3 million items in his collection, 90% of which are in vaults, I'm quoting. We need to get these items out of storage. We need to get them moving around the country. But this betrays a fundamental ignorance of the museum materials. The vast majority of these artifacts are things like bone fragments and are not exhibit-worthy. They are research materials. Collectively, they are extremely important to our understanding of Canada's past, but not for their value as exhibition pieces. Our third concern, and the final one I'll mention in my opening remarks, is our concern about whether this is going to result in a partisan representation of history. All of what's happening in regard to the transformation of the Museum of Civilization to the Canadian Museum of History is in the context of the broader undercutting of the role of Canadian heritage institutions. Library and Archives Canada, which we've spoken about on many occasions and have a national campaign called Canada's Past Matters, the cuts to archaeology and heritage sites as a result of the cuts to Parks Canada, the closure of federal departmental libraries, the reduction of public access to libraries, the elimination of the interline library loan system in our National Library, the elimination of granting programs for local and regional archives, are all a context that give us concern about what's happening. The decision to transform the Canadian Museum of Civilization seems part of a pattern that suggests the government's interest in using history to serve its own political agenda. In our view, and we'd speak out as strongly to any government appearing to do this, I mean, the celebration of the War of 1812 was the transformation of a rather tawdry series of skirmishes into some defining characteristic of Canada's history. The rewriting of the study guide for people who want to become new citizens that was done by this government a few years ago, this is what it looks like now, is a celebration of heroes, warriors, the pictures of warrior events. There's even a picture on the Aboriginal page of a former Governor-General of Canada who portrayed himself as an Indian. The sudden interest in the Franklin exhibition and the diversion of resources to an already decimated Parks Canada archaeology budget to focus on finding this wreckage. The glorification of the monarchy and the war. I mean, the context for all this gives us grave concern. The Canadian Museum of Civilization has been a remarkable contribution to the history of this country and to the people of this country and internationally. And for it to be transformed into something that will not retain its fundamental research and knowledge-generating function, and that will not have the resources to maintain the broader social history of our country, is something we lament. And we urge you to revise the mandate for this institution as reflected in Bill C-49 into something that continues the tradition of the Canadian Museum of Civilization. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turk. I don't know if you practiced that, but you landed on 10 minutes exactly. So, Mr. Rabinovich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. By way of personal introduction, I was the president and CEO of the Museum of Civilization from 2000 to 2011. During my tenure, the War Museum was built, and the CMC itself vastly expanded its collections and presentations on Canadian history and on international themes. Prior to this, I had been an assistant deputy minister, including in the Department of Canadian Heritage and other departments. I've always had great pleasure in having the authority from my minister to speak to members of the opposition or any MP, and at that time, at least as a public servant, to take information and report information fairly back to ministers. Currently, I'm not here representing any organization. I am a adjunct professor of cultural policy at Queen's. I'm also the volunteer chair of Opera Lyra, Ottawa's professional opera company. I publish considerably in various Canadian and international publications. All of that is by way of background to say that I bring a certain amount of knowledge to the table, which I hope is helpful to the members of the community, of the committee. As you know, Bill C-49 is part of an initiative that was announced by Minister Moore. And an important part of that initiative has been alluded to by the other presentations so far, which includes funding to enable the Museum of Civilization to develop networks for purposes of better historical exchange. All of that type of announcement is really part of a much longer debate that has gone on for years regarding the proper role of the nationals, the national museums. The general view, certainly amongst museum people, is that the nationals are uniquely positioned to promote linkages and networks, to share materials, to share research and information. And in this respect, the announcement by the Minister certainly fits beautifully into what could be an important development for the Canadian museum world. The type of initiative that the Minister announced could always be administered through the Department of Heritage. It could be administered by individual museums. In any event, I would certainly hope that it's not the last of such announcements. Allow me to turn now to the substance of the discussion this evening, which is Bill C-49. And I confess to finding the substance of Bill C-49 to be deeply confusing. It proposes in Section 2 to abandon the most successful brand name in Canada's museum sector. It's a brand that is known and respected throughout the professional world. Museum of Civilization is a pathfinder in what is now called internationally Museums of Society. As one example of its eminence, a recent conference was convened at the University of Barcelona to feature the experiences of the CMC as a model for its work that the university was doing on behalf of the Catalonian region of Spain. And several other museums of society, notably Quebec City's Musée de la Civilisation and Amsterdam's Tropenmuseum, joined with the CMC in order to present information on how museums can present people, society, and development in a way that is an example of what can be popular and credible and informative and contribute to national understanding. Museum of Civilization is described throughout the global tourism industry as one of Canada's must-see landmarks. It actually receives a 3-star billing from the Guide Michelin. Parliament Hill only receives 2 stars. Clearly, the people from Guide Michelin weren't here an hour ago. They would change their mind. Frommer's Guide, Lonely Planet, on and on it goes. They are just 3 examples. Visitor recognition of the name and the style and content of the CMC is enviable. It's one of this country's bright spots in showing itself. Foreign diplomats make this point repeatedly, and they use the museum as a key orientation point for new staff who arrive and also for visiting dignitaries. If the Museum of Civilization stands out as such a great product, why would anyone want to change its brand? Think like a business person. General Motors, even in its worst days, did not abandon the brand of Cadillac and the brand of Chevrolet. The challenge from a marketing standpoint is to extend a brand. New products can be added. An old brand can be relied upon to win attention and trust. If the government believes that the area of history should be given more attention in titling, then why not simply retitle the museum as the Canadian Museum of History and Civilization? CMHC, it has a ring, especially if you're a young homeowner. The simplicity of the change is almost breathtaking. It simply links together history and civilization. Beyond the proposed change in name, however, lies another shift that's deeply worrying. And the core of that, and I believe that Mr. Turk was talking about this momentarily, he spoke about the revision of the purpose of the museum and a new mandate which I would term narrow and parochial. The current mandate of the Museum of Civilization is set out in Section 7 of the 1990 Museums Act. It's not drafted elegantly, but its intention is perfectly clear. Its first focus is on Canada, and it empowers the museum staff to create knowledge, to expand collections that will inform future generations, and to share knowledge through public activities. The museum is also empowered in a secondary focus, which is to conduct external research, make collections, and share knowledge publicly. The Museum Act of 1990 refers to a full range of human activity. It calls on the museum to increase knowledge and critical understanding for human cultural achievements and human behavior. This range of knowledge is not limited to history. And I must say, Mr. Chairman, I have a PhD in history, and I speak to you with great modesty about my area of training and professional knowledge. Other knowledges, other fields of expertise are essential to understanding society and essential to operating good museums. The CMC staff in areas such as archaeology, Aboriginal studies, music and popular cultures, design and craft, they have made huge contributions to understanding this country in its fullest sense. History has been part of the work. History is not everything. The success of the Museum of Civilization has rested on its balance. The balance on Canadian priority has been balanced by presentations on international themes. The priority for domestic activities has been balanced by Canadian exhibitions in venues abroad. Research on the past has been balanced by research on the ancient past. History has been balanced by contemporary studies on Aboriginal arts, on nursing, on communities, on winter sports, on childhood experiences. It's all part of a balance, and the knowledge from this balance has been shared. I won't go into detail about telling you of the success of the Museum of Civilization. It is by far the most visited museum in the country. In a typical year, its attendance is double the attendance of a full-season NHL team. That's a lot of people. What's the meaning of the proposed new mandate? In essence, it aims to restrict and reduce the activities of a renamed Museum of History. The wording is subtle, but the meaning, it seems to me, is clear. Number one, the scope of interest will now be on events and experiences, quote, that have shaped Canada's history and identity. It's a backward-looking focus, purely on the past. Contemporary issues, contemporary activities, community issues, cultural expressions have no place in this, except peripherally as outcomes of the past. Secondly, the role of research is very reduced. Mr. Turk has spoken about this. Perhaps research will be intended as something ancillary to enhance Canadian knowledge. Perhaps research will simply be a form of enhanced journalism that is aimed at popularization. And thirdly, while there is mention of world history and culture, quote unquote, the focus is only on what can be shown here in Canada. The Museum of History is not now intended to be mandated to take part in research activity abroad, nor to be part of exchanges that would send Canadian museum knowledge to international venues. These proposed changes to the mandate will have the overall effect of reducing the museum's scope of activity and creating an inward focus that turns away from the world and eliminates concern with the here and the now. Today, as a standing committee, you have the mandate to look at the changes with long-term implications. The changes will be cumulative. The decisions that will be made by the museum will have a great impact on the hiring of staff, on eliminating people who are not historians, on selecting topics for future projects, and on downgrading hard tasks of creating substance. The celebrations of 2017 will be long past when the impacts of the reduced mandate will be felt. Mr. Chairman, with all of this in mind, I have prepared 2 recommendations which I hope the members of the committee will wish to consider, and I will provide you with some copies of the paper that I have written up. The first recommendation that I would make to you is that you consider that the name of the proposed Canadian Museum of History be changed to the Canadian Museum of History and Civilization. The second recommendation that I would make is that the purpose of the Canadian Museum of History and Civilization be written so as to increase throughout Canada and internationally knowledge, critical understanding, we did not speak to each other, critical understanding and appreciation of cultures, events, experiences, and peoples that have shaped history, identity, and contemporary society, with special but not exclusive reference to Canada, and to do this by expanding, studying, and preserving for posterity a collection of objects of historical or cultural significance with special but not exclusive reference to Canada. Mr. Chairman, as I said, I have some copies of what I have presented to you. I sincerely hope, despite my drafting, I sincerely hope that this is a basis for good, impartial discussion amongst the members of the Standing Committee, and that a bill of importance can be made better through your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rabinovich. Next, we will move to Mr. Holyoke.
I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the members of the committee for the opportunity to appear before you today on behalf of the Canadian Anthropology Society, which is an organization representing professional and academic anthropologists throughout Canada. I do have prepared remarks, but I was thinking about this on the walk over here today, thinking about the bill, and an image popped into my mind, a picture of my uncle back in the 30s on the farm back in Saskatchewan with a sedan that he had converted into a pickup truck so that he could haul boulders out of the fields. And I thought that is what Bill C-49 is. Unfortunately, it's more than that. You're taking a Rolls Royce and you're chopping the roof, tearing out the back seats so that you can turn it into a pickup truck. Canadians deserve an excellent Canadian history museum, and the Canadian Anthropology Society supports the creation of a museum of Canadian history. But we do not support the gutting of, as has already been said, the crown jewel in our collection of museums. It would be a terrible mistake with long-term consequences. I'd like to start my remarks by noting that we are also concerned about the consultation process as it has gone forward to this point. We feel that there was a lack of extensive or systematic engagement of the professional community of historians, anthropologists, and archaeologists in the CMC's planning for the proposed Canadian Museum of History. The meetings on the new museum convened to date do not meet the definition of true consultation, formal discussion between groups of people before a decision is made. The public meetings held last fall were brainstorming or awareness sessions, but not actual consultations. The museum's representatives did not undertake to provide participants with a synthesis of comments, a formal response to their concerns, or any specific indication as to how the museum would seek to integrate the received feedback in the research or implementation of the new exhibits. Only a minority of professional practitioners of the historical disciplines were invited to participate in these meetings. Now, I'm pretty confident that everyone in this room has had the privilege of appreciating the Canadian Museum of Civilization, this national monument to the cultural heritage and living present of all who have peopled these lands, most notably the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, as curated, researched, and shared publicly by a cadre of expert and dedicated scholars for more than a century. This history can be traced to the founding of the Anthropological Division of the Geological Survey of Canada in 1910. In those early years, and later as the National Museum of Canada, and then the National Museum of Man, the focus and collections remain predominantly focused on Canadian Aboriginal peoples. As established in 1990 and still in effect today, the vision of the then renamed Canadian Museum of Civilization was expressed in the mandate of the Museums Act to increase throughout Canada and internationally interest in, knowledge, and critical understanding of, and appreciation and respect for human cultural achievements and human behavior by establishing, maintaining, and developing for research and posterity a collection of objects of historical or cultural interest with special but not exclusive reference to Canada. In this process, the museum was empowered to undertake and sponsor any research, including fundamental or basic research and theoretical and applied research related to its purpose and to museology, and communicate the results of that research. The Canadian Museum of Civilization has, on this basis, been dedicated to publicly supported scholarship on core issues in the Canadian and the human experience, and is internationally renowned for its work. Upon a substantive research basis, public exhibitions, both permanent and temporary, have been rigorously created to be offered, critiqued, and constantly renewed as a trust to the Canadian people. This work has been largely, but not exclusively, anthropological in character and has depended on the sustained and sometimes lifelong work of specialist curators in ethnology, cultural studies, archaeology, and history. However, in May 2012, the Canadian Museum of Civilization administrative structure was readjusted to no longer include a Vice President for Research and Collections. Research and Collections is now placed under the former Vice President, who is now Director General of Exhibitions and Programs. Furthermore, the current executive of the museum includes no member with research or collections expertise. It is unclear what the future of research will be at the museum, despite the substantive need for research both in itself and as the basis for exhibitions and programs of quality. Bill C-49 provides, as you know, a new and significantly reduced purpose to enhance Canadians' knowledge, understanding, and appreciation of events, experiences, peoples, and objects that reflect and have shaped Canada's history and identity, and also to enhance their awareness of world history and cultures. It also has a narrower empowerment to undertake or sponsor any research related to its purpose or to museology. This language of undertake or sponsor any research renders even research within the reduced mandate optional. It would be possible under this language for there to be no research undertaken within the museum itself, and it appears planned that research may become an adjunct to exhibitions once they are decided upon, rather than the informed and critical basis from which they arise. Some of the consequences are immediately clear. The First Peoples Hall, a signature creation of the Canadian Museum of Civilization, is 10 years old. It cannot maintain or renew itself, and it requires continuing research and collaboration to ensure that it is current with contemporary Aboriginal life and engages with emerging issues regarding the past and present of Canada's First Peoples. This anticipated new museum on Canadian history will, according to Dr. Mark O'Neill, include, quote, aspects of the Aboriginal experience, close quote, but shift toward other still unspecified Canadian historical themes. Here, a very considerable amount of research and enhancement of collections will be required, as this has not been hitherto a focus of the museum. The museum's collections are currently, depending on definition, 70% to 80% Aboriginal, as has been the established curatorial expertise of the museum. Elements of material culture cannot simply be borrowed from other collections and placed on display. There are major issues of cost, access, time, research, and vision. Apparently, there will be a one-time only provision of $25 million for the transformation of the museum, but this will not be new money. These funds are designated for a renovation of half of the museum's 100,000 square feet and apparently other costs. Given current costs to meet curatorial standards at this level of roughly $1,000 per square foot, this generates an underfunding of at least 50%. The plan for the museum is due to culminate at the time of the 150th anniversary of Confederation and presents a view of Canadian history as settler history, in the words of Mark O'Neill. Canada's history from the fur trade to the Northwest Rebellion to Confederation, through 2 world wars and the Quiet Revolution, to Canada in the world will come to life. So Canada's history started with the fur trade. The frame has clearly and decisively shifted. The frame now is the imported imaginary of the modern European nation-state and its transplantation to a new territory. This history enshrines a much diminished vision compared with the collaborative one that recognizes our shared occupancy of these lands and the fundamental character of all Canadians as treaty people. Canada's history truly began long before there was any thought of Canada, and we all benefit from the living legacy of the First Nations, Inuit and Métis, fashioning vibrant societies and cultures and maintaining relationships with their neighbors. Those who arrived later, both the French and the British, and successive waves of newer arrivals from all corners of the world, have brought with them an abundance of linkages with larger and new global realities. Canadians are outward-looking and cosmopolitan by their very definition. Canadians deserve a museum that reflects that. The Canadian experience has never been limited in time and space and is intrinsically part of the larger human experience. We are concerned that the government's decision to transform the CMC into the CMH fits into a pattern of a politically charged heritage policy that has been emerging in the past few years. Alongside the substantial public funds that were directed into the celebration of the bicentennial of the War of 1812, this initiative appears to reflect a new use of history to support the government's political agenda, that is, the highlighting of particular features of our past favored by leading ministers of the current government. If so, this would be a highly inappropriate use of our national cultural institutions, which should stand apart from any particular government agenda and should be run instead according to sound professional standards and principles of nonpartisanship. So once again, I applaud the government's initiative to establish a Canadian Museum of History. I deplore the government's decision to convert the Canadian Museum of Civilization into a pickup. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Finally, we will have Mr. Anthony Wilson-Smith, President of the Historica Dominion Institute.
Monsieur le Président, membres du comité.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much for your invitation to appear today. The Dominica Historica community is the oldest in Canada, which deals with the citizenship and Canadian history.
Philanthropic and arts communities, and a number of them are members of the Order of Canada. Our programs range from our well-known Heritage Minutes to the Memory Project, which arranges visits by veterans to schools and videotapes their recollections of their war experiences. Passages to Canada brings Canadians from other countries, different ethnicities and cultures to our schools and other public institutions to speak about their experiences. The Canadian Encyclopedia, which is in the process of being enhanced, is a definitive digital record of things Canadian, and Encounters with Canada each year over 30 weeks hosts more than 1,000 students from coast to coast to coast for a week of learning here in Ottawa. We are nonpartisan. With that in mind, we very much support this legislation. Canadians can be divided into a variety of categories, but let's take two: those born here and those who come from elsewhere. Those Canadians born here are automatically citizens, and they're actually not required to know much about our country. Those who come here often, paradoxically, know more about their chosen country because they've chosen it and because they have to in order to pass their citizenship test. But they need and want more, and too often our schools are not the answer. As we know, only 4 of the 13 provinces and territories make it mandatory to pass history in order to get out of high school. L'histoire nous enseigne ce que nous avons réalisé à titre de nation, comment nous nous...
History teaches us what we have accomplished as a nation, how we got here, and gives us an orientation to the future. And we're not always in agreement with these lessons, and this may not even be desirable. We need to see other points of view and bring us to reflect in order to get at better results.
That process. $25 million is a lot of money, of course, and yet in some ways it's not. It'll be approximately somewhere around 70 cents per Canadian to create a better debate and to discuss our national narrative. No institution is a more appropriate place to do so than one belonging to the federal government as decided upon by the House of Commons, through which every Canadian has a voice. At our institute, we're proud of the work we do, but we don't presume or pretend to cover the sweep and scope of history. Our Heritage Minutes, more than 60 of them, offer snapshots of key moments in history. And I'll make the point that includes the events involving so-called ordinary Canadians, as well as bad news and sad and unfortunate chapters in our history. We presume those minutes educate and also engage the people who watch them, and that's been in the millions, of course, for more than 20 years now. We hope even more so that they create an appetite to learn more. And if that's so, then Canadians need a place to satisfy that appetite. History belongs to everyone. Notre récit national a sa place là où tout le monde.
Our national story is entitled to be seen by all Canadians. We know that many aspects of Canadian life is not sufficiently represented in our history.
Reflected back within a history museum. My own background's largely in journalism, not in history, and many of you might think of journalism as sort of the less well-behaved sibling of history. Journalism was sometimes described as the first rough draft of history, and these days, with the great democratization of the information process created by the digital world, we hear many voices interpreting events in many different ways. Smart people understand that it's a good idea to read many different interpretations to get a better sense of an event's context and its ramifications, including the building and the continuing development and evolution of a nation. To get that process going, there has to be a leader, a gathering place, a trigger to get that discussion underway. Perfection, we often say, is the enemy of the good. Sometimes the reverse can be true. Good can be an obstacle to perfection. Good can get to be very good aims at perfection. So we shouldn't stop and say, because something is very good right now, that it can't possibly get better. In 2017, as we mark 150 years of being together in recognized form as Canadians, a federally run Canadian Museum of History would serve our country appropriately and superbly. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. And now we will move to our rounds of questions and answers. This is our 7-minute round. I think we're starting with Mr. Young.
And I do want to say I'm a little saddened to hear anyone think of the Museum of Canadian History as a pickup truck, because I think Canadian history is fascinating, it's romantic, it's dynamic, it's amazing. And I'm thinking to when I was in the 50s, I grew up with I have 4 brothers. We used to watch television, lived in Toronto, so we got the Buffalo TV station, WBEN. So what we got was Walt Disney, we got American news and stuff. We got Walt Disney, so we saw some really good cartoons and shows about Paul Bunyan with the songs that are very catchy, and Davy Crockett, Abraham Lincoln, and George Washington. And we didn't get our own history. And this generation's not getting it in high school. We have to talk about our history more. And I'm thinking about our history like Sir John A. Macdonald, a man who basically assembled this country with the force of his personality, the second largest country in the world. Or Sir John Graves Simcoe, who banned slavery 60 years before the American Civil War with not a shot being fired. I want to ask Mr. Rabinovich a question, though. As you may know, sir, Michael Bliss, Canadian historian and award-winning author, states, quote, "It's very exciting that Canada's major museum will now be explicitly, not exclusively, but explicitly focused on Canadian history." And in addition, John English, former Liberal MP and Trudeau biographer, says, quote, "Congratulations on the Canadian Museum of History. This is a great boost for the museum," unquote. Do you agree with these comments? And if not, is there some common ground?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question to the member. I certainly agree with the way you have put the problem. I also grew up in the 1950s. I can still sing Davy Crockett, and I had a coonskin cap. And I certainly know that the Americans won the War of 1812 because of what took place in 1815 outside a certain Battle of New Orleans, and can sing that song as well. But those problems of mass media representation are not going to be overcome by simply renaming a museum. Mass media representation, the type of popularized telling of stories, telling of tales, as is done through Hollywood, is something that can only be competed against through having significant cultural activities and cultural industries, Canadian filmmaking, British filmmaking, other filmmaking. Where does the Museum of Civilization and Museum of History fit into this? As it now stands, the Museum of Civilization does a very, very extensive job of portraying Canadian history. My calculation is that 75%, 3/4 of all of the exhibition areas, public exhibition areas, are given to Canadian history. There are exhibitions on Sir John A. Macdonald, on D'Arcy McGee. There is nothing to say that these cannot be improved, and I think it is laudable that they do be improved, and installations dating back to 1989, 1990 can be improved. But fundamentally, does Bill C-49 improve it? And my advice to you would be, no, it does not. The bill as currently constructed takes away from that broader mandate of understanding the world and being engaged with the world. One of the proudest things I was involved with was opening an exhibition in the center of Beijing at the time of the International Olympics, followed shortly thereafter with the opening of 4 exhibitions in Brazil, showing aspects of Canadian life, Canadian artifacts, what we were accomplishing in Canada. That is a central part of the mandate of a Museum of Civilization. So I don't know how the circle should get squared. I do believe, as currently constructed, the legislation reduces and eliminates rather than enhances the ability of museums to contribute to solving the problem that you and I grew up with.
I just disagree with your interpretation of the Act itself, and I think time will prove me right, but I appreciate your answer. Mr. Hollyoak, I wanted to ask you, we deal with the members who are stating that there's a lack of support from this government for the arts and culture sector. Nevertheless, our government has increased funding for the Canada Council for the Arts by 20%. That's the largest increase in decades for the Canada Council for the Arts. We've also created 2 new national museums, and we're showing leadership in supporting arts and culture across the board. So I would proudly compare our record to previous governments. Does your organization support the measures that I just mentioned?
Do we support increased funding for arts and culture?
Canada Council for the Arts and 2 new national museums.
Right. Canadian Anthropology Society is funded by, most anthropologists are funded either by the Canadian Institutes for Health Research or by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. So I'd be better positioned, I think, to speak to that. However, I think that, as I said in my opening remarks, we support the creation of museums that will enhance Canadians' understanding of a variety of topics, including a Canadian Museum of History. We just don't want to see it done at the expense of what is a world-class institution.
Mr. McCavity, as you know, there are a number of key stakeholders that support the creation of the Canadian Museum of History. Could you tell me if you agree with such respected experts such as Yves Fortier, member of the Historic Dominion Institute's Board of Directors, and Marie Lalonde, Executive Director of the Ontario Museum Association, in support of the museum?
Well, sir, we are completely supportive of Bill C-49. And certainly are aware of the comments of a number of other people who have been supportive of the legislation as well.
Oh, I'm out of time. Thanks.
Mr. Nantel for 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors,
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to say from the outset that while I was listening to the description that Mr. Rabinovich was drawing of his vision of this museum, and I couldn't help but have some reminiscences. Perhaps we're more or less in the same gender group, if you will, the same cohort, exception made over here. I recall viewing the museum in September last year. I felt this pride of being a Canadian, this there's a mosaic of cultures that constitute this museum. And I was wondering if we could not use what you said yourself, Mr. Rabinovich. I greatly appreciated what you said, adding a dimension, history, to the Canadian Museum of Civilization, rather than amputating and replacing it by this notion of history. What concerns me today, I have questions for all of you, but perhaps you first, Mr. Rabinovich, briefly. The success that we've had with the current museum, could it not evaporate economically? Is this not one of the challenges, or perhaps even threats, that might be there? Does it not concern you that there might be some doubt cast on its viability? Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'll respond in the same language as the question was asked. I'm persuaded that we could easily add, and the possibilities are there. I mean, it's a huge building. I know that my former colleagues have ideas of their own how to use these spaces and use them viably in other ways. But it's very costly. It takes a lot of effort and a necessary investment to create true exhibits which are interesting, educational, as those that you've already visited. This takes money. It takes money and it takes time. Personally, I have no doubt that the mandate of the Museum of Civilization could be extended or even greatly expanded through better exhibits of historical material. But to come back to the bill, you must understand full well that the way it is presented, this greatly reduces the capacity of the museum and its activities in future. Yes, we'll come back to the critical understanding a little bit later. To my mind, that this is a very critical point. But I have a question now for Mr. McCavity or Ms. Evanson. I believe, Madam, you referred to the small 9I, I think, in the legislation. You find this sub-E, establish and promote links with other organizations of similar vocation. Now, once again, the question arises, anyone who is interested in history, of course, anyone can be and should be interested in history and civilization. We should be happy about that. This is good. Would you not agree, though, that it was already in the law, in the bill, current museum?
Thank you very much, Monsieur Nantel. Je vais répondre en anglais. It's my understanding that the network that will come out of the revised act is a new initiative for the Canadian Museum of Civilization and therefore History. And the memorandum of understanding that President Mark O'Neill referred to earlier this afternoon, that has been made with the Royal BC Museum and now with the Museum of Man in Manitoba, these are all new initiatives that will, once this new museum is established, provide the regions with opportunities to exhibit histories, regional histories in the national institution, the larger national story. So that's my understanding. Do you have anything to add to that, John?
I guess I would like to just comment that I've worked in the museum profession for about 40 years. In New Brunswick, Ontario, and now in Ottawa. When I look at the capacity and powers as they are outlined in this legislation, they are consistent with what a museum does. With respect to questions such as international role, I draw your attention to paragraph E, which clearly provides for the role of the museum internationally as well as within Canada. Probably, and the other thing is that most of these functions are really consistent with professional ethical guidelines. For example, the disposition, or what we call the deaccessioning of artifacts. The artifacts cannot be deaccessioned willy-nilly, and the revenue that would come from any sale of artifacts must go back into the collection. So, I consider, that I think all of the functions of a modern-day museum are really adequately cared for here, and I don't see many of the limitations that others have been concerned about.
Merci, M. McCavity. Et je ne vous demanderai pas de me quantifier sur 100.
Thank you, Mr. McCavity. But I'm not going to ask you to try to quantify what you like the best in this, the Pan-Canadian network, but it's destroying what's already there. I won't even ask you the question. It's there, but I have my answer on that. I think it's pretty clear that the museum community are quite enthusiastic. It's been said 100 times in the House. We're very pleased with the potential rollout of the project, which, to my mind, is the positive side of the project, obviously. But as Mr. Rabinovich has stated, to paraphrase him, why break up something that is a recognized brand to reduce it? I like Mr. Holyoke's metaphor. And let's not get upset if we talk about pickups and Cadillacs. It's a good image. It's a good image. We have something that is well used, well regarded, emotionally appealing, which could perfectly represent Canadian reality. It hasn't changed that much, of course, but your analogy, your metaphor is excellent, I believe. And I think you're basing it on your own personal experience, so that's very significant. Now, from your perspective, sir, given your expertise, do you not find it a bit unfortunate that we're removing critical understanding from the text of the mandate?
All the doubts that we do have on the approach of the actual government towards scientists and other questioning units in our society.
Yes, thank you for that question. Speaking on behalf of the Canadian Anthropology Society, I think that that is a critical concern for us, and the possibility that history will be presented from one viewpoint, as if there are no debates about history, or that there is only one standpoint on history, is profoundly disturbing. And I think that, furthermore, it will impoverish Canadians. I agree with the other members who've spoken to say how important it is that Canadians are engaged with their history. And, I grew up in the 60s, and I can remember when I was 10 years old, my dad gave me a book about the War of 1812, and I had no idea. And then for the next 10 years of my life, Lundy's Lane, it was like, something I thought about all the time, right? So I'm excited about Canadian history just as much as Mr. Young, for example. But when I was 10, my understanding of Canadian history was not the same as when I was 22 and I was studying history in a university. And at that time, I realized that there were more than one story to be told. There was more than one story to be told about the War of 1812. That John Graves Simcoe's actions were part of a larger world system, and that he wasn't acting independently as some sort of a hero. He was important, but all the other people that we don't talk about by name in history were also important. Mm-hmm. So I'm sorry I'm going on too long, but I feel that what I'm trying to say is that there are so many stories to be told, and there's so many ways to engage Canadians, and Canadians want to be engaged in a challenging way, not in a simplistic way. Canadians, as I said earlier, are sophisticated and worldly people. They don't want to be spoon-fed their history. They want to be challenged.
Nantel, Mr. Sims for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank the guests for being here today. This has been very entertaining and very informative more than anything else. Mr. Rabinovich, I understand what you're saying about the name change. We'll deal with that later. But first of all, you made the comment that the research will only be an ancillary device more than anything else, given what's coming from the legislation. Now, I want to touch on that a bit more because I did ask Mr. O'Neill about this idea, how the word critical was, critical was taken from the particular passage. Formerly, it was said here, knowledge and critical understanding of an appreciation, where now it just says understanding. I got the feeling from Mr. O'Neill there wasn't much of a difference, but I get the feeling from both you and Mr. Turk that there is a difference. What is that going to translate into? Because you also talked about a reduction in capacity to do research. The capacity for the museum to be something organic and something better than what it is now and to lend itself to the world. So could you comment on that?
I should explain, Mr. Chairman, changes don't happen simply overnight. They evolve in the operation of an institution over a period of time. Why a mandate and a mandate expression in law is so important is that it acts as the direct guideline to the administrators of the institution as to what they're supposed to do. I wish I could count on multiple fingers the number of times I and my colleagues over 11 years would go back to read the mandate paragraph in the 1990 bill, and how many times we would cite it to each other as we decided on the internal allocation of money for positions in one area or positions in another area. So this is a long way of saying that the wording of Bill C-49 will have a very direct impact on how the senior managers see their authority, their priorities, and their role. It's important. It is not just words. It is the law stating what you're supposed to do. Unlike my colleague, Mr. McVitie, having worked in these large institutions, having had to justify every penny to the Auditor General when they come through for their special investigations every 5 years, you have to be able to point to the law to explain what you're doing and why. As well, the Treasury Board reviews your plans, and the Department of Heritage reviews your plans each year. You have to be able to justify where does the law say that this is your mandate, this is your objective. So the way these words are chosen, and this is for all members of the committee, the way the words are chosen are really important. It's not window dressing. Critical understanding is an academic expression, meaning the ability to criticize, the ability to engage with knowledge and challenge it.
That's lost here, you feel? That's lost here
That
within
is
this
lost.
language.
Understanding, in an academic sense, certainly as I would teach it, is simply instruction. So, you have on the one hand the ability to engage, to debate, to argue, and on the other hand, the ability to distribute information, to educate.
And I'll get comments from Mr. Turk too in just a moment, but just to add this comment, it almost sounds to me like you want to set up something different. Something, you know, you're okay with the idea, because really what they're trying to illustrate is a museum of Canadian history, right? I mean, I think that's probably what's going to happen here. And in Mr. Young's case, he says he'll be proven right, and tomorrow I think he'll be proven wrong today. Because what you have here is something, as you said, parochial. Mr. Turk, would you like to comment on the critical aspect of it and the language of the bill?
I'm a bit perplexed by the discussion, to be honest.
Ottawa.
In the sense that if we take everyone in this room at their word, we're all in favor of a stronger museum that helps us better understand, appreciate, be critically aware of our history. If that is, in fact, what everyone in this committee believes, you have a unique opportunity, because this bill, C-49, adds zero to the current Canadian Museum of Civilization, but takes a lot away from it. and it can be fixed. It can be fixed easily by changing the mandate provision in the bill, because it takes away the brand, as Mr. Revenge said. It takes away the money. The cost of the reconstruction of vast amounts is going to be far more than $25 million. In terms of the sharing, which I assume is why some of our colleagues from the museum community are supportive, there's nothing, there is literally nothing in the current Canadian Museum of Civilization Act that would preclude precisely what is being promised under the new bill.
Mr. Turk, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off there, but I want to switch emphasis because I don't have a lot of time here. I've only got 5 minutes. To Mr. McCavity and Ms. Evenden, just on that point alone, here's something that's come to light. The $25 million is not going towards the sharing of these objects across the country. The former witness talked about how he envisions private enterprise being involved in sponsorship to allow these people and fundraising. That really has to be a disadvantage to a small museum, say from Timmins or from some smaller community such as Bishop's Falls, where I'm from. You know, but it's an advantage for those who can afford it as opposed to those who deserve it. At least that's my interpretation here, because there's no money involved for these smaller places. They just got to have big enough resources.
We've been completely supportive of developing private sector philanthropy to help museums. Currently in Canada, the museum community is receiving about 9% of its total revenue by way of donations. And I don't mean donations of artifacts, I mean donations of money. And that is much lower, for example, than in the United States and other countries. We need to develop a culture of greater support for our museums. And we've asked we've made proposals to the federal government and to the Finance Committee to set up a special program of matching donations as a short-term incentive to, no, it's not in this bill. I'm sort of speaking to the larger issue of the difficulty of raising money. But what I heard Mr. O'Neill say is that it was his role to undertake that national campaign. Because I agree with you, in Timmins or in Corner Brook, it'll be more difficult to raise that kind of funding. But I believe that there's probably some other steps that can be looked at and will be looked at by the Department of Canadian Heritage.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. Calandra for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, witnesses, I'll probably go fast, and I apologize if I cut you off at some point. Mr. Turk, you represent university professors?
That's correct.
Let me ask you this. Do your professors teach the same lesson plan year after year after year after year after year?
Certainly not.
No. They modify it and update it?
Yes.
Why do they do that?
Pardon me?
Why do they do that?
Because knowledge and information changes.
Thank you. Mr. Rabinovich, I have to tell you, I appreciate your passion on this. You came to the museum in 2000 or 2001?
2000.
2000? Sorry, from what department did you come from?
Human Resources Development.
And had you run a large museum before that, or?
I had for 3 years being the Assistant Deputy Minister responsible for museums as well as broadcasting and similar activities in the Department of Canadian Heritage.
Okay, thank you.
And I also sat on private cultural organizations as a volunteer.
Mr. McAvity, during Mr. Turk's opening statement, he talked a little bit about sharing. He mentioned how we want to share the collections, and he's talked about bone fragments, and a lot of it is for research. Now, it strikes me that you have the longest. You said you had 40 years experience in museums,
yes.
Right? Just to confirm. So 40 years of experience in museums.
40 years.
40.
Yeah.
40 years of experience in museums. Now, in my riding, there is a massive discovery, the Wendat, of a Wendat village. A massive, massive discovery, a film, a documentary called Curse of the Axe. Hundreds of bone fragments were found and other things. The Museum of Civilization is currently custodian of all of those artifacts, but our local museum also wants to have an opportunity to display those, as does the Stouffville Museum, as does the Markham Museum. In your estimation, do you agree then with Mr. Turk that these local museums don't have the ability, the local curators, the local people who will handle these collections, aren't sophisticated enough to deal with these collections?
I said.
Mr. McAvity?
I would not agree with that. There is the willingness and the desire to do it. What there may be is a problem with environmental controls at some of those very small museums, and that would be a legitimate reason because we have to be very concerned about temperature, light, humidity control, and so on. So the Museum of Civilization would have legitimate concerns that they would have to meet standards.
Yeah, so that we would put in place, or the museum presumably would put in place standards. But as far as your understanding is that local museums, there are a number of local museums, local officials, local curators who could handle such collections.
Yes, and I think the other point that I'd like to make is that today we're spending a lot of time talking about history, but I think a lot of people are coming at it from the point of view of putting a capital H on history, and local museums, as you've just mentioned, are using small h history, much more emphasis on social history and a broad definition of what history means. I do not believe we are talking at the new museum about a museum with a capital H restricted academic approach towards history. I think we're looking at, from everything I've heard, a much broader approach to history from before day one to late last week.
We heard from Mr. O'Neill. We heard that the content of the new exhibition is being developed by a multidisciplinary team of experts at the museum. That includes researchers, curators, museologists, in close collaboration with advisory committees comprised of historians and experts from across Canada. I believe he said that it was Dr. David Morrison, who has a PhD in archaeology from the University of Toronto. He is the author of many books with some 20 years of experience in the field. Sorry, yes or no, Mr. Turk? Do you know Dr. Morrison?
I do.
You do? Good man? Somebody who's capable of putting this together? Is there something I need to know about education at U of T which I need to be concerned about?
All I said was that virtually all of the academic organizations that specialize in this are indicating that they have not been properly consulted at all.
But you would agree that that is something, clearly we haven't passed the bill yet, and the museum hasn't changed, so obviously...
Well, the museum purports to be undertaking consultation, and you were just indicating...
Well, I think Mr. O'Neill expressed the massive consultation that's gone across the country, but obviously, as we go forward with the collections, you would agree that the right approach to take would be somebody like Professor or Dr. David Morrison, that it would be important to include researchers, curators, museologists, in collaboration with advisory committees comprised of historians and experts, so a broad cross-section of people who can...
But the very mandate of the bill ties the hands of Dr. Morrison because he can't do research. That's not the focus. Is that the type of people
in place?
But it doesn't matter who you have in place if research isn't part of the mandate.
On a point of order?
Yep. May I ask my honorable colleague to be a little more respectful of people coming in to witness their relatives?
You should talk to Mr.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not the same at all, and you know it, Mr. Young.
Thank you, Mr. Nantel. Mr. Calandra. Mr. Calandra, you have a minute and a half left.
Mr. Smith, let me ask you this. Places like the Wendat Village in my riding...
there was a comment made about the Huron-Wendat collection.
Sorry, Mr. The person asking the question really has carriage of... Because there's limited time, 7 minutes, so maybe you will get another opportunity, but when Mr. Calandra is directing his question now as someone we try to... Because of the limited time, they have carriage of their time. Yeah. Mr. Calandra.
How important is it? Obviously, your organization has done a spectacular job in connecting people with their history. But as I see in my own hometown, things like this Wendat Village, how important it is to our local community. How important is it that we do a better job of connecting Canadians with their history, in your opinion, and especially in light of the things that your group is doing?
Fundamentally, we as Canadians don't know our history beyond experts in this room and beyond. We don't know. We don't know enough about Sir Johnny. We've polled repeatedly on this over the years, over the last 10 years, and actually not shown any significant improvement. People don't know that Sir Johnny was the leading father of Confederation. Some of them don't even know what he looks like, even though he's on a dollar bill that a lot of people see in certain numbers every day. They can't identify who D'Arcy McGee was. They don't know Canada's contribution in World War II, which is something which came up earlier. On virtually every mark they fail, and that's partly because they don't learn. So fundamentally, in terms of history, in terms of our heritage, the system is failing us. So something has to change within. Now, when you talk about local museums, I go back to the old Tip O'Neill quote about politics, that all politics is local. So is history to a large degree. It's about communities, whether we define them geographically, through ethnicity, through culture, but through reach out and through touching each other. And we have to get better. So something within that has to change fundamentally. To get somewhere, you have to leave somewhere behind.
Thank you. Landra. Now we are moving into 5-minute rounds, and Madame Gauthier-Sweet.
Oui, merci, tout le monde.
Yes, thank you, and thanks to our witnesses. Now, I don't think anyone here is against the promotion of Canadian history, but what we don't agree with is the restriction on the scope of the activities of the museum. Now, we have directors of museums who have problems with this bill. I think we should ask ourselves a few questions, and we only have a couple of hours total to ask about these things. I'd like to discuss research. Museum archaeologists decide on their own project themes, generally speaking. However, there's going to be a reorganization, and I rather fear what will happen to research afterwards. Will it be based on what we need for the next exhibit, or will archaeologists have some from scope for fundamental research? For example, there are 3 ethnologist positions which have not been replaced or filled at the museum. We have a war historian who's a curator of ethnological collections right now. I see that somewhat in parallel to what happened at Library and Archives Canada. Many people lost their jobs, and now people who want to do research on site have difficulty because there's not enough people to assist, or they're dealing with individuals who are absolutely not material experts in the domain. So I think that we have ill-defined the word research in the new mandate. Would you agree with that, Mr. Turk?
Been removed from the mandate. That's why it doesn't matter what qualifications Dr. Morrison has or others have. It's been removed from the mandate. So as Mr. Ravinovich had indicated, when the museum has to account for how it's expending money, when it has to make tough decisions in this difficult financial environment, it can't point any longer to a provision in its mandate that specifies that one of its priorities is research. So that's part of our concern. And I remain perplexed. We're all in favor of advancement of Canadian history, and we can fix the problem. This committee can make proposals that easily fix the problem. Mr. Ravinovich gave you 2 of them. They're not diminishing anything. They're preserving the brand. They're preserving the focus on research and knowledge and critical understanding. And they're preserving the diversity, and they allow all of the kinds of sharing that our museum colleagues are so keen about. The current Museum of Civilization has more than 200 MOUs with other museums across the country. There's nothing in the current act that prevents this. So I'm just perplexed why we're diminishing what we currently have when we have the opportunity to preserve it and expand it, and we could all be supporters of that.
Merci. Monsieur McCavity?
Thank you. My next question for Mr. McCavity. We spoke of funding that might be allocated to culture. Now, $25 million to renovate or revamp was mentioned before, whereas a number of smaller museums are in desperate need of money. Don't you think this money would have been better used to directly assist these smaller museums, particularly when we see or compare the 2012, 13-14 budgets? 57.4 million compared to, prior to the recession, 62.4 million. So we've had much better budgets in the past, and now we're coming back to budgets which were smaller than before the recession. Could we not spend this money more wisely? Thank you very much.
You worked in a museum, Pointe-à-Calière, Montreal, so you know our field. In terms of the funding question, the $25 million certainly would be nice, but the only thing is, I point to you that that is a one-time contribution, so it will not be repeated. What we would be really looking for would be ongoing, continuing support.
Évidemment, moi aussi.
Yes, obviously, so would I. Mr. Turk, you mentioned earlier the Franklin expedition. Now, vis-a-vis the cuts at Parks Canada, they suffered a lot, major cuts. And there was a very broad research project, I believe, to try to find the ships, Sir Franklin's ships. However, the same expedition could also be mapping the sea bottom, the seabed, to establish Canada's rights, claims to the Northwest Passage. So I think this is research which is somewhat, there's some bifurcation in the purpose of that research. It's not archaeological research purely. Perhaps you'd like to speak to that.
A quick response. Yes, my point was, in a severely diminished budget for archaeological work, to have what's basically a political priority drive how that money gets expended is our concern.
Thank you, Mr. Turk. Mr. Calandra for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Rabinovich, again, thank you. I really do appreciate everything that you've said, but I just want to point out that you had said that you thought the new mandate was a bit restrictive. Winnipeg Free Press said that the previous title was vague, as was the museum's mission, which seemed to include multiple trajectories and themes, everything from postal history to natural science and exhibits on butterflies. So obviously there's a lot of disagreement always going to be on what mandate is the right mandate and what mandate is the wrong mandate. I guess that's always open to interpretation. Now, Mr. McAvity, I'm going to ask you because you seem to have the most experience of anybody on the panel when it comes to museums. I know that in Section F of the Act, so 9F says, undertake or sponsor any research related to the purpose, to its purpose or to museology and communicate the results of that research. That seems to me that research will obviously continue. Section E talks about organize, sponsor, arrange for, or participate in traveling exhibits in Canada and internationally of museum material and its collection and from other resources. I'm wondering if you could tell me, in your opinion, since you have the most experience of anybody on the panel, do you think that the mandate is too reduced? Do you think that we won't be able to continue with our international desire to promote Canada and to learn more about other cultures? Is the mandate too narrow? Are we eliminating research with this new act?
I guess my question is, I'm not sure what the mandate is. I see what the purpose is, but I don't see a paragraph here that specifically says mandate. So terminology is being kind of used. I assume that we're talking about the paragraph that says purpose, because then that is reinforced in paragraph 9 in the subparagraphs. So if we can be clear on that, what is outlined in Section 9, I think, is adequate. It meets the needs. It defines pretty well all the potential issues that would come up.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Wilson-Smith, I really want to get more to you. What opportunities do you see for not only for small museums, but organizations such as yourself? There are other organizations that are also have a desire to promote Canadian history and to learn more about international history and cultures. What opportunities do you see in this that don't currently exist? Why is your organization so in favor of this new bill?
It's the creation of a conversation, which is a phrase similar to something Dr. Rabinovich used in a different context recently. You have to get people talking about something for ideas and exchanges to flow. And I'll give you an example. In the last Heritage Minute that we released, which was on 1812, quite separately from the federal initiatives, we showcased a former slave who had formed an all-black, almost all former slave, a regiment of slaves to fight for the British in the Battle of 1812. Well, that was an aspect. The size of the Afro or Black Canadian contingent at that time, the efforts that they took, the feelings that among them, that was, that spoke to an element of society we haven't seen before. Similarly, we have another minute coming up for release in a couple of weeks, which is also about 1812, which highlights the First Nations effort in there. Now, I don't know history as well as most here, but I know it better than most Canadians. I had no idea that about 10% of the fighting forces of the British or pro-Canadian side in 1812 were First Nations warriors. So through those conversations, you have outflows that create awareness of other cultures, of their contributions. When you talk about World War II, it's not only about the heroism of the fighting force at the front, it's about the efforts of women and other people at home who helped modernize Canada's economy and workforce through the building of factories. You create a whole rollout. Through discussions like these, you say, what are your priorities about history? What are the issues that matter? What is the relationship between civilization and history as such? And you help to define that. And it's not just through the discussions, it's through the debates and the disagreements that you get there. But first, you have to pay attention.
Any more time, Mr.
You have 40 seconds.
Mr. Brown had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I could use a lot more than 40 seconds.
Let's try and make it quick.
Before I was the Member of Parliament, I was the chair of the Ontario government agency that operated Upper Canada Village and Fort Henry, two wonderful living museums that depict Canadian history. And I would argue that, and with all due respect to our professors on the panel, that history is not the exclusive purview of university professors, and we should be doing everything that we can in order to teach Canadians history. And last year's commemoration of the War of 1812 in my area was a wonderful opportunity to teach young people the history. And it was, and so when I hear some of the comments here today about us not having an opportunity to get that out there, I think this is a wonderful way to do it. I support this bill completely, and I don't believe that there's anything that precludes research. But one quick question. I think that this opportunity to have these displays going across the country, and I know we maybe only got a few seconds for each of you, but maybe we could hear a little bit about what all of you think about the opportunity to get our history out there across the country and using the Canadian Museum of History as the base.
Sorry, Mr. Brown, that'll have to be a closing comment because it's 7:30 and we're out of time. I want to thank each and every one of our witnesses. Thank you for appearing and contributing to our study on Bill C-49. Thank you, all of you, for sitting through our previous testimony as well. It's been a long night for you, so thanks for your input. Meeting adjourned.